Concentrate on your breathing pattern. Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. When you realize how perfect everything is, you will tilt your head back and laugh at the sky. Every situation in our life is temporary. So, enjoy the good ones because it won't be like that forever. But at the same time, during your bad ones, believe that this too shall pass away. So, think positive. After all that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Now, rub your palms together and slowly open your eyes. What did I do? I made you all pause for a moment and relax. Why did I do that? I did that because in this fast-pacing world, we often tend to neglect our inner selves. With so much negativity around, in order to bring out the best, you need to connect within first. What benefit would it bring? With greater concentration and relaxation mind, you will be able to grasp all the important things in a better way. Good morning, everyone. I'm your host, Ashi Kaur. I'm sure you all must have heard the quote, individually we are one drop, but together we are an ocean. So, with that being quoted, I welcome you all to the day 2 of our international webinar on Transforming Education Through Global Collaboration, the Roadmap, in association with Savitribai Phule, Pune University, Faculty of Commerce and Management, Xavier's Institute of Social Service, Ranchi, Corporate Gurukul, Singapore, and Happy Marketers, Singapore, and BPB Publications. Through this 3-day international webinar, we intend to demonstrate that in today's tech-savvy world, all the gaps can be bridged and nothing can stop us from growing, not even a pandemic. Before we proceed any further, I would like to inform all the participants that you may type your questions in the chat window and we would be delighted to take them up at the end of each session. With that, to begin this day, I've got the privilege to introduce our first guest of the day, the Interim Associate Dean at Singh College, Northridge, California State University and ex-Director of Risk Management in Outsourcing, FinCo, Dr. Shrejat Jimmy Gandhi. We welcome you, sir. Sir holds Bachelor's in Science in Quality Management, Entrepreneurship and Systems Engineering and Management from Illinois Institute of Technology, Chicago, Master's in Science from California State University, Northridge, and PhD from Stevens Institute of Technology, New Jersey. He has been over the experience of teaching additional courses including Supply Chain Management and Sustainability in the Global Supply Chain, currently co-authoring 2 books on risk management and case studies in systems engineering, is also working on developing new courses in engineering management field. Sir's current research focuses on areas of quality management, globalization, and sustainability, and has over 30 publications in various conferences and journals related to engineering management domain. He has received the teaching awards from Stevens Institute of Technology and the American Society of Engineering Management. Educational responses to crisis are capable of changing the meaning, purpose, and values of school. And so, the topic for our first session today is transitioning to teaching in a virtual environment. It would be a delight to hear from you, sir. Please take the charge.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you giving me that introduction. Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody is doing well during these difficult times that we all are currently going through. And I'd like to start by thanking you to take the time to attend this presentation, and thank the host of this event for giving me the opportunity to have a conversation with you all, in which I'd like to share some of my thoughts, and also, most importantly, listen to your thoughts and get your inputs so that it can be a two-way dialogue. I'd like to start by giving you a little bit of background and introduction about myself, and telling you how I got into the whole world of virtual teaching. And even though virtual teaching and online teaching has become part of our daily vocabulary in the last 4 to 5 months, it's been something that has been on an upward trend for the last several years, with things like MOOCs, with things like online degree programs, to short certificate programs that are being introduced by universities, by companies. So the virtual world of teaching and learning has exploded. Right now, more so with the pandemic than ever. But the key that we would like to focus on today is that how do we maintain quality? Because it's not just about the quantity or the scale, but especially when we scale up and we have a huge number of students who are being taught in a virtual modality, how do we really maintain the quality? How do we create a perception even amongst employers that yes, online education is as impactful as a face-to-face interaction that we have with our students? So that's the purpose, to tell you a little bit about myself, in addition to what was said in the brief introduction. I started teaching about 12 years ago, and can we request the other mics to be on mute? Thank you. So I started teaching about 12 years ago, and I've taught some of the courses that were mentioned in my introduction, and I've been teaching online since about 2013. So I've been teaching virtually and in person, but obviously the focus of this conversation is virtual teaching, so I'll focus on that for about the last 7 years. And it's been interesting to see how things have changed in the last 7 years in the virtual world of teaching, where it's become more interactive, it's become more hands-on, and how we can really improve the quality of education that we provide to our students when we teach them virtually. And of course, this is a topic that is extremely important to all of us now, because we are all going through this global pandemic. And unfortunately, it looks like the virtual world of teaching is something that will continue to be with us, irrespective of how long this pandemic goes on, right? Because one of the things that have people always say that when you think of a crisis, see how you can identify opportunities. And in higher education, I think one of the opportunities that we can identify for ourselves is that how can we think of improving the online education, the virtual world of teaching, as an outcome of this pandemic, because it's something that we have all been forced to think about, right? Previously, you could have situations where faculty were hesitant to do online teaching, but now, irrespective of what stream we are from, whether we're from commerce, whether we're from engineering, whether we're from finance, whether we're from the arts, whatever it may be, right? Everybody has been thrust into this situation due to the global pandemic, where we have been forced to adopt it, right? So some of the earlier adopters, the transition was easier. Some of the people who have been thrown into it for the first time because of this global pandemic have had a bit of a harder time, or more of a challenge in adopting to the virtual world of teaching. So there's obviously people who are on a spectrum, right? But we need to think about how can we offer a quality education to our students through a virtual modality. But before we get into that, I'd like to discuss the basics of why do we educate, right? What do we hope our students get out of their education? And the the whole purpose of educating a student, right, is to give them skills. And what we hope they get out of their education is to be able to give them a set of skills that make them marketable, that make them competitive in their field, that make them employable, right? We want to produce graduates that industry folks want to come to our campuses so that our students can get placements, can get jobs, and our students, our goal should be to create students who have the skills that industry wants, right? And we want to try and narrow that gap between academia and industry, because time and time again, we hear from industry that the students that graduate, they lack skills X, Y, or Z. So we continuously have that conversation with our industry partners, and then our goal is to instill those skills, those wants that the employers need, so that we can produce competitive students, right? In a nutshell, that's what we want our students to get out of their education, and that's why we educate them, because education is the single largest factor for social mobility. The more we can educate people, the better decisions they can make. They are more qualified for better jobs, a better standard of living. So education translates to social mobility. We have seen that at our university so much that there are a lot of our students are first generation students, and they come to college, they get an education, they get better jobs, and their standard of living progresses, right? So that's one of our goals. But now the question is that in order to do that, right, to instill those goals into our students, a lot of times we use active learning strategies where we have collaborative learning, we have problem-based learning, and experiential learning. Now, when we say collaborative learning, it's a collaboration between different stakeholders, different entities, right? It could be students talking amongst themselves. It could be in group discussions. It could be student discussing things with the faculty, where the faculty or the professor basically serves as a moderator for a discussion versus just lecturing. Because in a lot of our classes, our students bring different perspectives to the classroom. So we want to bring out their, understand their perspective, understand their thoughts. That's the collaborative learning. The problem-based learning is, again, where we present the students with a real-life problem and ask them to solve that problem based on concepts that they have learned, so that they can actually see that the things that they have learned are not just theoretical, but they are actual topics that can help them solve day-to-day problems. Some of the classes that I teach in the field of engineering management, such as supply chain, sustainability, quality management, Lean Six Sigma, I always tell my students that your takeaway from each class should be that you should be able to extract learnings from your classes and be able to solve real world problems on the job, because that is part of my job, to instill in you a skill set that you can solve problems in your work on a day-to-day basis. Not 2 years from now, not 5 years from now, but right after you finish the class. Because again, we want to teach them skills that they can use in their work environment right away. And for that, the problem-based learning is really, really useful. And of course, experiential learning is kind of similar, because it is based on the experience that the student gets in a certain field, right? And that could include classes which include theoretical knowledge as well as experience in the field, such as internships or working on a project for a company. In a number of different ways, we can do experiential learning. But the reason I've put this slide on here is that this is easy to do and to create the impact on our students when we are doing it in a face-to-face environment, right? But now the change that we are all facing is that the educational world is transitioning from a physical classroom to a virtual classroom. So when this happens, we need to ask ourselves that how do we really continue to do these active learning strategies? How do we maintain this collaborative learning, the problem-based learning, the experiential learning, all of these things which develop that skill set in our student body? How do we continue doing that when we are transitioning from a physical classroom to a virtual classroom? So before we answer that question, let's just come up with one uniform definition of virtual learning for the purpose of this presentation, and where we define virtual learning as an experience that is enhanced through utilizing computers, internet, and technology inside the educational organization, and the instruction most commonly takes place in an online environment, right? But even in the online environment, there can be different ways or different modes, I should say, where it can be asynchronous, it can be synchronous. There can be chat rooms, there can be discussion boards. There are a number of different tools that can be incorporated into the online environment. And we'll talk about that as we go through this presentation in the next few minutes. Additionally, what I'd like to point out before we get into some of those points is that when we talk about online or virtual learning, a very important distinction to make right from the start is that what is the difference between a virtual classroom and a virtual recording? Because unfortunately, a lot of times what people do when they implement the asynchronous model of learning or teaching is that they record a bunch of videos, post them on the learning management system website, and expect the students to watch it. That's fine if it's one piece of the bigger puzzle, right? But if that's the primary mode that you use to impart the education to the students, you are going to be selling yourself short, and you're not going to really achieve what you want to achieve from a virtual modality, because then you might as well just tell your students to go and watch a bunch of YouTube videos. And the bullet point on the bottom is that there is a difference between a professor or a faculty member and a YouTube video, right? And that main difference is the interaction piece, is the engagement piece, which is our responsibility as faculty members to make sure that the student is engaged, the student is involved in the discussion, and the student still remains interested in the topic because of that engagement. Because otherwise, if you're just going to put up a bunch of videos, the student is going to lose interest, right? That was actually one of the challenges that was identified when you had these large-scale MOOCs or large-scale classes where they had hundreds of students enrolled in the class at the same time. That yes, it was a lecture that the professor was giving and it was recorded, but impact-wise, you are not really instilling those skills. You are just disseminating information. And there's a huge difference between those two things, because giving out information, there's tons of venues or sources from which students can get information today. Because from when most of the time all of us as faculty members went to school, we did not have the resources and the online connectivity that the students have today. So they can access information through a multitude of sources. But it's our responsibility as faculty, as professors, to bring together that information and present it to them in a way where they can actually get the experience and develop those skills that the industry wants from them. That's the difference between a professor and a YouTube video. And that distinction has to be constantly kept in mind as we go through and talk about how we can really have an impact through a virtual mode of education. And so, since we've been talking, we've said that the main goal or the main challenge is to maintain the impact of education in a virtual environment. And we talked about what the impact is over the last few minutes. So when I ask myself the most important thing regarding virtual education, I have two main questions that come to my mind, right? And that's what I've put on this slide. That one is, how do we substitute whatever we do in a face-to-face environment in a virtual environment without sacrificing the impact that we have as faculty members of being in person with the student? That's the overarching question that we have. And the secondary question is that if we maintain that impact that we've talked about in the first question, how do we maintain the relationship between student engagement and learning outcomes in a virtual or online environment? Because research has shown undoubtedly that student engagement leads to better learning outcomes. So that takes us back to the basic question, and that's how these two questions are interconnected to each other, that we need to maintain the student engagement in the virtual environment. Because the student engagement is what is going to keep up the student motivation. It's what's going to help the student develop the skills through those, through collaborative learning or through experiential learning. That's how they're going to develop those skills. They will remain engaged and thereby have better learning outcomes. So how do we maintain the education? How do we answer these two questions? Let's look at what we mean by virtual teaching, right? And as we are experiencing right now on Microsoft Teams, whether you use Microsoft Teams, whether you use Zoom, whether you use WebEx, whatever tool you use and whatever learning management system you use, whether you use Blackboard, whether you use Moodle, whether you use Canvas, whatever the case may be, we need to keep in mind that the virtual classroom should have a number of components, right? And we need all these components in order to really have that impact on the student and to maintain that interaction. Because again, going back to the second question over here, that how do we maintain that student engagement or the student interaction? Well, if you look at all these components of virtual teaching, you need all of these components to maintain the student interaction, because without them, it's going to be difficult. So let's go through them one by one and talk about why it's important to have them, right? And it's not in any particular order, or it's not that we start here and end here. So I'll just start at random by using the whiteboard. And I'll start over there and then go through in a clockwise manner. Why I personally, when I teach in the virtual environment, I think the whiteboard is extremely important, the whiteboard function, because when you are face-to-face in front of your students, what do you do? A lot of times when there are discussions, when we write points down, we make notes. The students follow. They can interact with us, and based on their contributions to the discussion, we make notes, right? We don't want that aspect to be lost. So as we are doing an interactive online class, you can open up the whiteboard, share your screen, and note down the points. One of the things functionality where I use the whiteboard in almost every class that I do is I open the topic with a question, right? That, okay, what does sustainability in the supply chain mean to you? And I will give you a lot of examples from supply chain management, because that's the class, one of the classes that I teach, and it's the field that I am absolutely passionate about. So if we start with an open-ended question like, what does sustainability in the supply chain mean to you? People are going to talk. Now, if we don't write down those definitions, it's hard to keep track. So that's why using the whiteboard, even in the virtual classroom, is important, so that I can write down and note down points that the students are saying that, all right, this is what it means to be, or this is what I think sustainability in the global supply chain is. So you write that down so that then when you pull up your next slide and talk about what it is, you can actually compare it to what they said and tie in points that they have contributed to the discussion. If you don't use that whiteboard functionality when you're teaching in a virtual environment, you're going to lose that opportunity of being able to capture what the students have said. So that's why I think one of the reasons I started with the whiteboard is because I think that's the most important functionality that I would want in the virtual classroom. Second is, as we are having a discussion in class, because it's so much more effective, it's so much more engaging for both the student and the faculty member. Because personally, I would get bored if I just had to stand there and talk for 2 hours or an hour and a half to an audience with absolutely no interaction from them. So I want my students to participate. I want them to have questions. I want them to add their own perspective to something that we're talking about. And for that, the second point comes into play, that it's option to raise hand for asking query, right? So let them know from the start that yes, we will, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. So please feel free to raise your hand, because I will keep the participants list open and I can see the order in which people have raised their hands. So one by one, I can call on them and say that, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, in this order, you can ask your questions or bring up your points for discussion. And then once again, you kind of transition back to that mode of being a facilitator more than just lecturing to the students. And so that function enables you to do that. The third point is multi-level fallback mechanism. Is sometimes the internet connection is not good. People would prefer to just call in, right? So give them the option that if you want, you can call in. If you want, you can log in using your laptop. If you want, you can log in using an app. So pick a virtual classroom software that has those options, so that the students have the option of logging in using their phone. Everybody might not have a laptop, so give them the option that they can. If we use Zoom, again, a lot of examples. I use Zoom, so I'll use the examples of Zoom, that you have the app on your phone, you have the app on your iPad. So even if you don't necessarily have a laptop or a desktop available to you, the student can log in through different mechanisms. Next point is live tech support. Might not always be possible, but there should be some tech support team, right? That if the students have some problems, who can they call? Who can they ask? There needs to be some sort of support that we can provide our students, because invariably, particularly at the start of the session, students will have problems, and so there should be tech support available to them. Next point, again, it goes back to the point of synchronous learning, because in the virtual environment, you want to have synchronous learning. So just the way we have for face-to-face classes, you'd have a fixed time that we meet on Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 1 to 2:15 in the afternoon. Even when you are doing a virtual classroom, the same schedule should be maintained, and there should be synchronous learning that, yes, the class on applied mechanics will be offered on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 1 to 2:15 in the afternoon, just like we would in a real face-to-face environment. So that way you maintain that schedule. The students are required to log in that time duration, and they actually log in and participate, right? Live audio video support. Ask your students to turn on their webcam, right? Ask them to, when they talk, to turn on their video so that you can have that eye-to-eye contact. You can have the conversation. It's more engaging. These may seem like small things, but they really do make a difference. Record your session, right? Because one of the reasons, and this was even way before the pandemic started, and I used to teach online classes since 2013. And since we have started using Zoom, the ability to record the session has been very well received by students. And the reason being that they say that sometimes, if we miss what you're saying, or if we don't understand something, if we don't feel comfortable to ask you then and there, this gives us an opportunity to go back and listen to the recording and actually understand what was said. And then if we want, we can always follow up with you again. So recording the session is always a nice to do. And the reason I say nice to do and not 100% sure is because I at least always ask my students that is everybody comfortable being recorded? Because sometimes people don't feel comfortable and then it affects the participation of students. So I always check and make sure that the students are okay with it. And last is the point that we've already talked about when we talked about the whiteboard, is that sharing your screen or other materials with students, right? So whether it's a website that you want to pull up for a related article, or whether it's a YouTube video that you want them to watch for a short amount of time and then generate the discussion around it, right? So again, it goes back to that point about what is the difference between the professor and the YouTube video, that yes, you absolutely can and should use videos, but the key is that share your screen, let them watch the video in real time so that then you can generate a discussion around that topic, right? That what was the purpose of watching that video? What was the takeaway for all of that, right? We can do that in class when we're in a face-to-face environment, again, by sharing our screen and using other material or any other materials that we have on our screen with our students, we can again mimic that face-to-face environment in the virtual environment in which we're teaching. So that's why having these components of the virtual classroom is extremely important, because only then we can instill that sense of engagement from the student, right? Now, that doesn't mean that this solves all our problems. We need to absolutely be aware that there are some challenges. And one of the things that I would like to hear from your end when we open up the session for discussions and question and answers is that what are some of the challenges that you perceive at your institutions for your students now that we are all in this pandemic situation where we are all forced to be in the virtual teaching environment, right? These are some of the main challenges that we have come across, particularly in the last 4 months since we have all transitioned to teaching in a virtual mode. One is that the students don't have the needed technology, right? And when we say technology, it could be the required hardware, it could be the software. Yes, they may have a machine, but the machine may not have the specs to run the particular software or the learning management system, or to have a Zoom classroom on it. Might not have a webcam, for example, right? Some of our students had laptops, but they didn't have webcams built into the laptop. Or a very common issue is a high-speed internet connection. They might not have that, which then again affects the quality of the education, because constantly, if your lecture is being broken up, you can't hear what the professor is saying or what your other friends or colleagues are saying. It's really a distraction. It affects the overall experience and it affects the engagement, right? Because if constantly the connection is not going to work because of the internet connection, students are going to lose interest. After a while, they're going to say, you know what, I can't really understand properly. They're going to lose that motivation to stay connected. Another common issue is the proper space to log in from, right? And privacy issues that, some people, they might live in a joint family. They might have a large family that lives in a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom apartment. They might not have a dedicated space, right? There might be other people, brothers, sisters, parents, even in a joint family, it could be even other people who live in the same household, who are obviously, living in the same space. There is noise in the background, and everybody can't just shut up for the entire 2-3 hours that you're sitting on an online class. So it might be a space issue where students might have problems to that. Where do I log in from? I don't have just a dedicated space from where I can log in and do my class without any distractions. Right? Privacy issues. We say that yes, it's good to turn on your webcam so that you can have the eye-to-eye connection, but some students may not want to turn on their webcam, right? Because of a number of reasons. And it's because then there are privacy issues that come into play. Of course, you can address that by using a background, right, for Zoom, which is fine. But again, that doesn't solve the issue of the student not possibly having space, right? Another major thing is resistance from professors to teach in a virtual mode, right? And when we say resistance, I don't necessarily mean that I won't teach online, because everybody is forced to do it now because of the pandemic, right? Previously, people had an option where they could say, no, I don't want to teach online. I choose to stay in the classroom. But right now, with many or most of the countries across the world having a lockdown situation with universities being shut down, professors have not really had a choice, right? But that doesn't mean that there's no resistance, because the resistance can be in different forms where they don't want to apply the new pedagogy that's needed or learn the new technology that comes into play when teaching an online class. Because again, it's not about just creating some material and posting it on Moodle or Canvas or whatever learning management system site you have for the course. But it's truly about developing a pedagogy by using a variety of different tools that you can engage your student. That's the key, right? And sometimes we have resistance from faculty members to do that. And it's not just from the faculty, but it's also resistance from some students, right, who participate in a virtual environment, because they feel that, especially when there's a large class size, that it's going to be problematic. And they're right, it is problematic, because this virtual classroom works well in small groups. And when I say small groups, up to probably class sizes of 35 students at most, because after that it becomes really difficult to manage. And as we go through some of the additional points, I'll mention specifically some of the challenges that come up, right? And the other challenge from students is not preparing before class, because one of the other things that we can do to make the virtual teaching environment more interactive, more engaging, is to tell them to read up on particular topics before they come to the classroom, so that when they come to the virtual classroom, we actually can have discussions around the topic versus it just being a one-way lecture. And we can convert it that instead of being a one-way lecture, it can be more of a facilitated conversation or a facilitated discussion that the faculty member leads and has the students contribute to, because that way the engagement of the student still remains, right? So some of the key points when you are planning and designing the course, right, for teaching in your virtual environment, think of some of the key points that we have talked about, including the student participation piece right from the beginning, right? When you plan or when you design your course, think about it right from the start, so that when you design it, when you build your slides, you can build in those points after every 2, 3, 4 slides, where you can tell them to go into their breakout rooms. And you can do that either at random, because Zoom gives you the functionality of assigning students to the breakout rooms either at random or using the pre-assigned teams. So I do it both ways in my classes. Sometimes I do it at random, so that way they are forced to meet each other and have conversations with people, because otherwise typically what happens is in the virtual environment that creating that sense of community that you could in a face-to-face classroom is really challenging. So that's why I do break them up into the breakout rooms at random, and I let Zoom assign them, so that way typically they would end up with a different group every time. In a class of 30, 35 people, I break them up into groups of 5, 6 people, 5, 6 students each. So that way they end up with a different group every time, and they have the opportunity to get to know their classmates, right, and introduce themselves. So plan all that when you are designing your course, right? That how do I put in those pieces of interactions periodically throughout my class, so that it's not that it's just a 1.5 hour lecture where the students are falling asleep and not listening to half of what you're saying or not absorbing half of what you're saying, right? So that's one very important point to keep in mind when you're planning or designing the course. Second is troubleshoot problems before they happen, right? So we talked about the tech support team, but also for your students before a class starts, maybe have a trial session. I always do that when I have a new session starting with students. I always give them the opportunity. I email them and say that, you know what, let's have a trial session. We can do it on the Saturday before the semester starts or at a predefined time. And the reason for that being is so that they feel comfortable with the technology. I mean, even for this presentation, right? We had a session before this presentation where the organizers were kind enough to help me with the technology, and we did a practice session. That makes me feel so much comfortable today that I was comfortable that the technology would work. Right? So that's why it's always beneficial to troubleshoot the problems before they happen. Next is getting to know your students from day one. I think this is really important because, again, it's about creating that sense of community, which is really challenging in a virtual environment. If we're in a face-to-face classroom, it's a whole different dynamic, right? But how do you, again, create that dynamic when you are in a virtual environment? Take the time to get to know your students on day one. Ask them to give you a little bit of background information. Yes, it will take time out from your syllabus, but again, when you are designing your course, build that into your day one, right? I spend the first class, and my classes are typically about 2.5 hours in length, but I will spend almost the entire first class just introducing myself, telling the students about my background, and then going around the room and asking them to turn on their webcam, tell us a little bit about themselves, tell us why you are taking this class, what do you hope to get out of it, what is your work experience, if any, because then it not only helps me understand who they are, but I can tailor the examples that I use in the class based on the student's background information, right? So I can tell them that, so if I know that there are students from the aerospace industry, I can give examples of supply chain in the aerospace industry. If I know that there are a lot of students from the pharmaceutical industry, I can give examples of supply chain from the pharmaceutical industry. And that makes it more relevant to the students, right? Even if they don't have work experience. In some of our classes, we don't have students who have work experience. Okay, then I change the question, and on day one, I ask them that, well, what industry do you think you would like to work in? Right? So it doesn't have to be that this works only for people who have work experience, but you can twist the question and say, what industry would you like to work in? Because it's, again, about keeping that student engagement in an industry that is likely to be of interest to your students. Fourth bullet point is let your students know what to expect from day one. So make your expectations clear, right? Tell them what are your assignments going to be. How are you going to grade them? I know in a lot of educational systems, unfortunately, it's one exam at the end of the semester where students just mug up a bunch of things and then come and answer questions. I think that is a pretty archaic system. And if we really want to use the virtual environment of teaching to the best potential possible, break it up into smaller assignments that you grade throughout the semester. Especially if you are an autonomous institution, you have that flexibility, do that. I understand that, in the education structure in India, sometimes there is a university and the question paper comes set from the university, and some institutions may not have that flexibility. But if you are an autonomous institution and you can do that, absolutely do that, right? Let the students know that this is going to be how we are going to assess you, and let them know from day one, right? Make it clear. And that again ties into or segues into the next point, which is communication guidelines. And make your communications clear, right? Provide your contact information. Tell the student how they can reach you, whether it's online office hours that you're going to host through Zoom. Tell them you're going to be available via email so that they can email you questions. They can talk to you on Zoom. They can talk to you on the phone. If you don't want to create, give out your personal phone number, create a Google phone, Google Voice number, so that you can use Google Voice and you don't have to give out your personal phone number to students. Completely understand that. Go on to Google Voice. All of us have a Gmail account. Create a Google Voice number so that then we can give that to the student so that you can communicate through that if they don't have the opportunity to log in through Zoom every time. But either way, tell them what the communication guidelines are. Tell them how soon they can expect a response from you. So I always tell my students that if you email me during the week, I will respond within 48 hours. And if you don't hear from me, please send me a follow-up email so that the student doesn't feel that they have reached out and then not heard back from me. Settling into the online education, by this what we mean is that let the student also get used to the online environment. When we transitioned to our virtual mode of teaching 4 months ago when the pandemic hit, a lot of students were giving us feedback saying, this is the first time we are taking an online class. So give them some practice assignments where they can see how to submit it, how you are going to give them feedback. And don't grade those assignments, or at least don't use it as part of their final semester grade, so that they feel comfortable to make those mistakes and learn and get used to and settle into the online environment, right? During the class time, as we talked about, build in the discussion, set your class rules clearly so that people don't end up talking over each other. Tell them that if you have your questions, please raise your hand. I will come to you, or you can post your comments in the chat window. So that way every student feels that you have addressed their comments, but at the same time, it has to be done in a systematic manner so that there's not chaos, right? Because one of the feedbacks that I received initially when this started, I had not set up clear standard operating procedures during the class time. And the students said that it was confusing for them because, people would just start talking at random. And when you're in a face-to-face environment, that's okay because other people can see who's talking. And you can see people's body language. But when you're in a virtual environment, it's very important to set those standard operating rules because otherwise it can get confusing and a little chaotic, right? Another thing during the class time, use multiple modes of delivery, right? Have the lecture, have readings, have videos, have other online content that you can provide to the students. And of course, the accessibility and flexibility. That please be flexible with your students. This is not just a challenging time for us, it's a challenging time for everybody. So understand that the students also have a number of challenges, and be flexible with them. Right? Make clear to them how they will be assessed, because all students are going to be concerned about the marks that they get on their exam, on the grades that they get on their assignment. So tell them upfront. And made, because, and that's what we should keep in mind, that this slide talks about learning and leading, right? So it's, we don't know everything about the virtual environment. It's a learning process for us too, and we need to accept that technology changes. But one of the things that we can tell ourselves is that we can do our due diligence and keep up on what the changing technology is, and what are some of the changes that are happening, and how do we incorporate that into our virtual teaching environment, so that when there is a change or a new technology, we can learn it and then in turn implement that into our classroom. So with that, thank you again for taking the time to attend. I really appreciate it. And I'd like to open it up to questions and answers and discussion. And I'd love to hear your perspective on things.
Hello.
I request all the participants to please unmute yourself and ask the questions.
This is Dr. C.N.
Sir, good morning. Gandhi sir, good morning.
Good morning.
Hello. I have a question that
Yes.
no doubt there are so many problems. First of all, I would thank you that you very nice session. And question is like so many problems are there, no doubt. The glitches and mode of learning, iPad, mobile, everything. But then how to deal with students who are not attending then? How?
So that's the thing.
Ma'am,
So what I have
ma'am,
done-
could you please introduce yourself first? Each, yeah.
Sorry, ma'am. I am Dr. Ruby from Pune University only.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr.
Yeah.
Ruby.
Thank you,
So
ma'am.
that's a great question, Dr. Ruby, because yes, the attendance is a huge problem. So what I have done is, because of exactly the same problem that you mentioned, I have put about 15%, 20% of the grade for class participation. And I tell the students up front, and that goes back to the point of communicating things clearly, that part of your grade will be for class participation. And that class participation includes not only logging in, because otherwise the other problem is they log in and then just walk away. Right? So you'll see them in the list of participants and then they just walk away. So you make clear upfront in your syllabus right from the first day that 15-20% of your grade will be for class participation. And I will ask questions in class, and I will pick on random students to say that, okay, you know what, Joe, can you please tell me what your thoughts are on sustainability of supply chain? Or Tom, can you please tell me what you think your understanding is about economic sustainability or financial sustainability, whatever the topic may be that you're talking about. So that way, make sure that way the students are kind of forced to attend, and you pick at random. It's not a foolproof solution, but it's your job to look at the list of participants and at random pick students in different classes. So what I try and do is, after each class, I actually make notes to myself as I'm talking, because every time I have an online class, I will always have notes in with me in hand, and I write as students are talking. So I kind of keep track that, okay, this student talked in this class. And before the next class, I keep a note so that way I don't keep calling on the same students again and again. And then the students realize that, oh, he's going to pick on people at random and ask us questions. So we better be there, because otherwise I started noticing that people would just log in and then walk away. So this way you tell them that you better be there for that entire 1 hour session, because I'm taking the time and effort to educate you and you're paying the tuition. You better make sure that you stay there for that hour and a half and concentrate.
Thank you so much, sir, for a nice session and a very good answer. And I will see that I deal with my students in this manner. Ma'am, Chandrani ma'am, thank you so much.
Good morning.
Yeah,
Good morning, Jimmy Gandhi. This is Dr. C.N. Narayan.
Hello.
Dr. C.N. Narayan from Pune Business School.
Welcome,
Good morning,
sir.
sir.
Good morning. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning,
I-
C. Narayana, sir.
Very good morning to
Yeah.
Jimmy. I was listening to you.
Pleasure to have you.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. And most of the things which you covered was in synchronization with what I have presented yesterday. I think.
Okay.
What you have suggested, we face this kind of problem of student attendance at the beginning of March. We started our online classes, and we were also experimenting a lot of things. Okay, one
Yeah.
is on the platforms, and second is also in terms of attendance issues. So simply what we have done is 10% of the internal marks we were giving for attendance, and at the end of every module, we were introducing a quiz system wherein everybody has to score minimum 70% in quiz to get a certificate also, so that we ensured that the learning really happens there and they were attended throughout the class.
Very nice.
So this
That's
this
nice.
is one thing which you've done. And
That's great.
interesting.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Jamie. And the other thing, I have experienced.
So the quiz would be at the end of every class, sir? Is that it?
Every module, because a class is difficult to conduct a quiz, but
Okay.
attendance is taken. And then we also started tracking the duration of how many people were there at the beginning of the session and
Yeah.
at the end of the session. So we had around 85% full attendance, after 15 days of introduction of all these mechanisms. Okay.
Okay. That's
And
great.
number two, we also formed the student body who are good in technology to come with ideas. Okay. And
Wonderful.
we can implement these things in our teaching. So it was very useful to faculty members as well. And yesterday I shared something on Google site. Every faculty started developing in the site itself, their course module, everything right from the beginning. What is the overview of the course and what are the things, question banks, and what you should look at if you want more, you can go to links. So these are the things we have done to improve. I thought I should share it with you.
Thank you very much. That is very useful. I really like the idea of the quiz at the end of each module. I'll think of that too. That's great. Thank you for sharing
Thank you so much for this wonderful session.
Good morning, Mr. Gandhi.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, this is Ashish Kulkarni. I am a representative of LabHole Canada in India, based at Mumbai, and I am working in a didactic segment for corporate and education relations. Now, the session I have is a very wonderful session, and you have touched a very important and each and every point very nicely. About the second slide where you have mentioned that there are the three different way we can conduct the virtual education. On the third point, I would like to ask, is that virtual internship, in a virtual internship, there is experiential learning. Here in virtual internship for the core engineering, like a mechanical or say electronics, is it make a sense and which makes students as employable? Do you feel that?
So, well, that's the thing, right? So in certain fields of engineering, so I teach in engineering management. So a lot of the internships that my students do are in the field of supply chain or in quality management, or in data analytics. So I am a little lucky in that, Professor Kulkarni, that I have my topics are in fields where students can do a lot of virtual internships. other of my colleagues who teach courses like in mechanical engineering, particularly in mechanical engineering, actually, it is challenging. And what they have done is, so they do certain aspects on through virtual, and then certain companies actually have the interns come in on a rotating basis so that the number of interns are reduced at one time and social distancing can be maintained. Electrical engineering actually has come up with a lot of engineering internships have actually come up with, again, because it's a lot of software based, so virtual internships can be done virtually. So I think the biggest challenge is for mechanical engineering and civil engineering. Although even for civil engineering or mechanical engineering, a lot of the aspects like CAD CAM you can do through a virtual internship. So I think you need to be a little selective, that there are certain aspects that you can do through a virtual internship, and then there are certain aspects that you can't. And you need to be selective about that so that that way you can minimize the exposure of the student when they come on to your company campus to do a certain internship. And at least that's what the companies are doing over here, because they want to minimize. So one of the popular companies where some of our students are doing internships is at Boeing. And first, a lot of students were concerned that are they going to cancel the internship for this year, because a lot of companies have. But a lot of the larger companies said that no, we will do virtual internships. And I know a lot of students have had fantastic experiences at Boeing.
इसका WhatsApp number भी मैं
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Professor Jimmy, just one sec. You were talking about the mechanical engineering, students. So
Yeah.
I don't have at all any exposure. But then while we were discussing, and even Mr. Kulkarni was talking about it. So here I think many virtual labs and shop floors or production units
absolutely.
can come as simulation in a simulated environment.
AR, VR.
And augmented and reality can come in, wherein at least we can build up that skill set 20 to 30%. Yeah.
Correct.
So, but it is costly, and in a country like India, where so many 40,000 colleges, of which I think so 10 to 15%, I don't know the exact percentage, but then so many mechanical engineering disciplines, can. Are there.
AR, VR is absolutely the augmented reality, virtual reality.
Good morning, Jordan. At the same time, just a minute, Jimmy. Jordan, who is the CEO of Willows Group US, he is joined in. And good morning, and good morning from India. And Jordan, we have even Professor Gandhi from California, Northridge University. So he is just on our session, onboarded and session, and we are doing a question answer round with him. So once he's over, we will take you through, but please remain onboarded at this point of time. Thank you, Professor Jimmy. I took your 2 minutes of time. Thank you,
no problem.
Jordan. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
The AR, VR aspect, what you just mentioned, is absolutely true, but you're right. The cost is prohibitive, and I don't think it's just in India. It's the same thing here. We actually have. So I'm the interim associate dean of Seng College. So even though I teach in engineering, in the administrative position that I have for the Seng College, I oversee programs from other disciplines as well. One of those programs is a program in nursing. So we really ran into the problem that how do you really give the experience of this experiential learning for a nursing student? Now that's really challenging. So we looked at some AR, VR options, but they are really, really expensive. And is it that this university absorbs that cost, or is that a cost that we then pass on to the student in terms of increased tuition? That's a discussion that needs to be had internally in the university. And right now we're trying to decide that if we were to, include that as a cost of the program, how much would that translate to increased tuition, and see if we can implement that. So it's not just a problem over there, and it's not just something just for mechanical engineering. I think medical schools, like I said, our nursing program, we are having exactly the same issue.
Thank you, Professor Gandhi, for such a nice and prompt answer to the point.
Thank you. I think we are over time. I don't want to take the next speaker's time, but I'm open to any additional questions.
So any more questions, please, team?
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear
My
me?
My question is to Jimmy, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, the question is for Jimmy, sir.
Sir, hello, sir.
Yes,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, you broke up.
Okay, sir.
Oh,
Sir, I'm
couldn't
Pooja,
hear you.
MCA student from SIOM.
Mm-hmm.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Sir, I have some 3-4 questions based on my experience as a virtual learner. As everything started unexpectedly, do you think the virtual learning will lack practical knowledge in some way, because some of the things need some action or doing, and lot of students don't even have a good connectivity, as you said about having a virtual learning software, but sometimes somehow it is not possible. And as you said that some students don't want to show their faces, and I feel social skills are also important, and it will affect our social skills too, as the option to choose. It will make a habit of hiding behind the screen, which is not good.
Absolutely.
So I want to know your thoughts. And sir, I have one more question, that is the curriculum or the syllabus that we are following. I think it needs to modified based on requirements that we are facing today, or as we are affected. Because it doesn't match with the current situation. So I just want to know your thoughts.
Can you be a little specific when you say modify the curriculum? Can you be a little more specific? Do you mean the topics wise? Do you mean the pedagogy wise? What exactly do you mean by modifying the curriculum?
Sir, as a IT student, some of the things we used to do in lab. So we are not, we can't do that it now. So we can change them with some other activities, and the practical lab things we can do by ourselves.
Yes, or another option is also that if the university, so what we are doing over here for labs that our students used to come in for. Now, obviously, if there were things like like a civil engineering lab where you are doing earthquake tests, then it's a little difficult to be done virtually. But if you are an IT student, one of the possibilities that the university could do is allow you to log in remotely to the machines in the lab. I don't know, through a VPN connection. And if you can do that, because I know you're doing that over here, but that would require some support from the campus IT so that they allow you to log in remotely so you can access the same software that you would in the lab. Is that a possibility?
So I think connectivity
Pooja,
issues are very high.
We can have you discuss with Professor Jimmy during his free time. We can definitely connect you from our college, and let's have that elaborate discussion for some other time. Professor Jimmy, please do not mind, because
no, not at all.
Jordan and then Shilpi, they all are in line.
I completely understand.
And
thank you so
can
much
have Pooja connect with you. Thank you so much, Professor Jimmy. Thank you so much.
Sir.
Wonderful session.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. We would look forward to hear from you sometime again.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor Jimmy, once again. Nice to interact with you. Yeah.
Likewise.
Good morning, Jordan.
Good evening.
Good evening.
How are you guys doing? Good morning to everyone. Good evening to me.
Doing fine, and hope you are doing fine too.
I am. Actually, it's interesting because as I dialed in, I wish I could have joined earlier because I noticed the professor was from CSUN, which is actually probably about a 20-minute drive from here. So it's interesting that, despite this being an international conference, coincidentally, I'm speaking immediately after someone who's like almost down the street. So yeah. But yeah, so it's great to be here.
Sorry for the interruption. Team, can we have you introduce Jordan?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
The future of the world is indeed in the classroom today. I now introduce to you all our next guest speaker, President and Chief Technology Officer of Veloz Group US, Mr. Jordan Mendler. We welcome you, sir. Jordan Mendler, sir, leverages his years of learning, engineering experience, and his extremely diverse professional background as the President and Chief Technology Officer of the Veloz Group. Jordan, sir, provides technical leadership and direction to Veloz across a broad set of industries, services, and projects while shaping the innovative nature of the Veloz culture. A lifelong technology enthusiast, Sir was a network administrator for an internet service provider at the age of 13. At 15, Sir started JMD Enterprises, an online-based national distributor of automotive parts. Jordan, sir, continues to head technology for all internal and external Veloz ventures, driving both the technical strategy and the Veloz engineering team. Sir remains a professor of engineering and information technology at UCLA Extension, where he has taught the intricacies of Linux, cloud, and cluster computing to fellow engineers and executives since the age of 24. Sir also led and contributed code to dozens of open source projects and is known within the open source community as the lead developer of FlySpray. We are really eager to hear from you, sir. I request you to take the charge.
Well, thank you for the introduction. It's actually interesting whenever I do international conferences, it makes me appreciate how much more respectful the rest of the world is. I think just the general, introduction and approach and everything, it's a good way. Here, I think people are much more matter of the fact, but nevertheless. So it's great to be here. I don't have slides, with kind of the world as it is, everything's changing really by the day. I know in America, it's crazy, political environment, medical environment. One day offices are closed, the next day they're open, the next day they're closed again. I know, across the world, kind of every day there's some new country that's becoming an epicenter and huge just change everywhere. So, because of that, I thought it might be better, instead of having sort of formal slides, almost to just talk kind of informally about maybe what I see as some of the trends in education. Just to preface, hearing the tail end of the last speaker just talking about VR, AR, I just want to preference. I am not an education guru by any means. So, my background, traditionally, I sort of have a background in software technology, really software side, business and entrepreneurship. Recently, I've been teaching data science at UCLA. So my experience is really coming at it more as a practitioner, be that either as a teacher or as a, just sort of like business owner or software engineer working with international teams and local teams. So I just want to preference, like in that sense, I think my perspective and, I kind of don't want to present myself as an authority because I think a lot of other people are much more authoritative in, like educators where it's their full-time job, administrators to really study these. But, with that said, I think, it's really an interesting state of the world. You know, COVID has really put forth the importance of technology and illustrated how technology can be forced to change the way we act in our daily life, just kind of without even expecting it. But at the same time, I do think a lot of the trends that are happening have sort of been set forth for a long time, and COVID may just be the trigger. So I think the education system is really interesting because, at least in the United States, we have a really good higher education system. The university system is excellent. Graduate system is excellent. And then when you look below the university system, it's actually very poor. So I don't have the exact figures, but, we rank extremely low amongst elementary and junior high school and sort of what we call K through 12, which, if you want to just sort of say pre-university, right? So it's really interesting because, every country faces different challenges. In the US, I think, one challenge people think about is university. So like as an educator, I have to think like how is this going to affect the students I teach? So now I'm teaching, masters in data science students. So, how is this going to change their experience? We have a lot of MBA students that work for us. Ultimately, business school is part education, but a big component is networking. So you have to think about how is this going to change your experience? These guys joined graduate school, MBA programs, largely to meet other business-minded people. If they're now no longer meeting face-to-face and going to bars with their colleagues and going to restaurants and, essentially a program that's largely built around, face-to-face interactions, that really kind of changes things. So I think it's just interesting when you look at different areas. So maybe I'll talk, I think, since other people can share more from the perspective of experts, I won't really get too far into, the future of AR and VR and, how AI is going to revolutionize education. Because, I think there are other people who can speak better to those specifics. But I think instead I'd like to take a higher level viewpoint and really just assess the world, where things are and, where they've been and where I see them going from my own kind of humble, perspective. So I think it's interesting. As a software engineer, having a software background, I'm super biased. From my perspective, the entire world should have been remote 20 years ago, right? When I was a college student in my undergraduate, I was questioning, why am I going to class? Why do I have to wake up early in the morning to sit at a lecture, take notes on a piece of paper, hoping I don't miss anything? Why can't I record this, at home, stream it over the internet, be able to sort of reverse, fast forward, tag aspects of the video I think are interesting, have the teacher be able to sort of annotate their video. And, this was 20 years ago. So obviously, as a software engineer, I'm very biased because I'm used to working in front of a computer. I'm used to having, I don't need the human interaction that other people might need, right? Like MBA students would be a great example. Those guys are all about face-to-face meetings. Sales is very, personality driven. For those guys, they're having a hard time transitioning. On the previous, question, they mentioned some of the mechanical engineering areas, nursing, where it's sort of a hybrid approach. if you're a mechanical engineer, some things can be done remote, some things can't. You know, you're writing software and able to VPN in, but at the same time, you have physical machines. If you're manufacturing, like, you know, we work with people in China who manufacture different parts for us. Like, ultimately, there needs to be someone physically present who can maintain and run injection molding machines and various things of that nature. You know, you need CNC operators. So I can design, you know, not me, but like a designer can create their CAD mock-ups and do it all remotely. But ultimately, you know, you need someone on the ground who's able to operate the machine and you know, maintain it, switch out materials, you know, 3D printers even. Like if we talk about the future where we have 3D printing, you know, you're still going to have physical maintenance. So, you know, I really see a hybrid approach. I'm very big on that personally. And frankly, that's what I've always found work the best for me, you know, even prior to COVID. So I think the world is going somewhere where, you know, 80 or 90% of your existence can be online and virtual, you know, and then you have your 10 or 20% that isn't. So, you know, for fun, one of my hobbies is I like mechanical stuff. I like building out of wood and welding and, you know, doing like metal fabrication, building cars, building motorcycles. So like I'm on a newsletter for just one of the local schools that offers classes and training in those areas. So they mentioned that, you know, they're taking a hybrid approach. So their approach to education is going to be that lectures are online, you know, tests are online, everything that has to be online is, but the lab component is still going to be in person, because ultimately, you know, you can't learn how to be a CNC machinist if you don't touch a lathe, if you don't touch a, you know, a mill or a lathe, or, you know, if you don't get in with a Haas machine and get your hands dirty, like there are certain things you have to do physically. So their approach is, okay, previously, you know, everything was in person. So how about now everything that doesn't have to be in person remains not in person, and then what does have to be in person, they're splitting into groups. So rather than having, you know, 20 people in a lab, now they're going to have like 5 people in a lab. What does that mean? That means that, you know, the education is going to suffer. People are going to, instead of having, you know, 10 hours a week where you're like able to touch the machines, maybe now you'll have 5 hours a week. That's going to force the university to kind of step up its game in developing better simulators. You know, an interesting example is if you think about pilots, if you want to learn how to fly, right? So much of that training is done just via simulation. You know, they have such advanced simulators that simulate, you know, 747 aircrafts and, you know, all of these different machines that, you know, by the time you're actually going up in the air as you know, flying the plane by yourself, you know, you've sort of been in the classroom and simulation for such a long time. So I do think there are aspects of those types of models that, you know, kind of could be carried over. You know, with that said, you know, you kind of take other ends of the spectrum. I have a 3-year-old son. So like previously he was in daycare. So his education consisted of half a day with other kids, half a day with sort of teachers. You know, obviously at that age, they're not teaching much sophisticated things, but, you know, they're teaching basic skills, language, and I'm sorry? Oh, is there a question? Oh, okay. And I'm happy, I'll do QA at the end. So if anyone has questions, I'm happy to do QA and also answer offline. But, you know, so I have a 3-year-old son. He's you take his scenario. So when I was growing up, my entire education at that age as an infant, it's very physical and interactive. Since COVID has started, he's no longer going to daycare. He's essentially being raised by his parents with, very little interaction to other children. So it's just kind of a different upbringing. I think that in a lot of ways it's good. I think in a lot of ways, at least in America, we've had an educational system that's been extraordinarily broken. The university system is amazing, and then everything below it is awful. So in a lot of ways, this forces change, right? It forces people to adopt technology. So maybe my son will suffer because, right now there aren't yet technologies that, can provide the same level of learning, but, with time, people will figure it out, whether it's VR or AR or AI. My personal opinion, and again, I'm not, I don't have as much expertise as others. But I think technology, I'm a big believer in technology. So unless there's, a nuclear weapon that drops and wipes off the entire electrical grid, short of something completely unforeseen, you look at the evolution of technology and it moves at such an amazingly fast rate. Moore's law, from the time I was in high school, everyone's saying Moore's law will never keep up. Moore's law is impossible. Moore's law, it just mathematically can't keep up, yet they're still innovating. So, one way or another, VR, AR, we're not there yet. Right now, the VR experience is not very good. It's sort of, to do VR well, such as an aircraft simulator, it's extraordinarily expensive. If you want to do cost-effective VR, I mean, it's a terrible experience. You wear goggles and, you're still getting dizzy pretty quickly. You can't wear goggles 8 hours a day and have true simulation playing with other kids. But, with that said, I'm sure 10 years out, someone will come up with some revolutionary technology where, they'll figure out a way to reflect light and project light in three-dimensional space. And then, as a result of that, you can sort of have 3D models that you're sort of interacting with, things like smell. They'll have, sooner or later, they'll come up with smell sensors and smell simulators and, ways to transform and convey information that we may not even understand. So much of the human interaction is still subconscious and biological and just the result of years of evolution. People are constantly figuring out new ways that humans interact and communicate and transmit information, be it through sound, smell, body language, all of these things. And with time, technology will catch up and figure out ways to accommodate that. And I think as a result, frankly, it will make things a lot better, because right now, if you look at the education system, you have classes with too many students. So practically speaking, in America, a big issue is the student-teacher ratio is very, very low. Students aren't getting personalized education. When you just think of if you compare your education to even something as simple as buying soap on Amazon, right? Amazon is using way more sophisticated machine learning to figure out who you are and what your preferences are and how you should teach. And while that's happening at Amazon over something as dumb and meaningless as soap, your entire education system, you still have one person who may or may not be qualified, right? If you take a second grade teacher, right? At the end of the day, how much does a second grade teacher really know about math? They're not mathematicians. They're moms or dads who happen to be decent at math and good at communicating. And they're standing up in front of 50 or even 100 students. LA, Los Angeles has a notoriously bad public school system just because government funding and political issues, and really it's nonsense. But, if you think about that, compare the experience of one person talking to 100 people. Right now, just think of it. There are 226 people here. So I am just talking, and you're all listening. You're hoping I'm an expert. You're hoping I know what I'm talking about. You're hoping I'm not just some random person that, I don't know, like for whatever reason is involved, right? So that's one. In education, there really is a lot of, like, you think about how often there are scandals where you have teachers and then it turns out, they weren't qualified to teach. It turns out they had criminal backgrounds. You think of things like that. Right now, I'm just projecting information. You're all sitting there. Some of you might find this boring and you wish there's a fast forward button, and you can like fast forward to the Q&A and check back in an hour and ask me the 2 questions you want to know. You want to know, what temperature is it in Los Angeles? You don't care about anything I'm talking about. Maybe some of you, you lost me. Maybe English isn't your first language, so you want to watch this recording on a slower speed so you understand better. You want to pause it. You want to rewind something I said to really process it. You want to pause something I said and then spend 20 minutes searching that topic, really researching it. None of that happens in the traditional education system. The traditional education system is entirely broken. So, I think in that sense, while granted, there's going to be a lot of growing pain, really, it involves people like those on this call. And I'm not going to take credit for it because, you guys are you guys, I'm sure there's much more talent on this call than me in the education. But if you take, it's people like you that are going to make the difference, right? It's people like you guys who are going to come up with, smart algorithms where you're going to say, okay, well, yeah, you're right. The way I learned math is completely broken. How can we make this better? My son, he loves trucks. If I try to teach him math by numbers, he doesn't care. Like, if he went to a first grade class right now as a 3-year-old, he would lose attention. He wouldn't care about anything they had to say. So, if you could develop a system that's smart enough to know that he loves trucks, and how do you develop that? All the data is there. You can look at my YouTube playlist and you see that 90% of the child content I play is related to trucks. You figure out, okay, I love trucks. Great. There you go. Here, Henry, I have one garbage truck and one, one recycling truck. And if you count 1, 2 trucks, 1 + 1 is 2. That's going to engage the student a lot more. Even things like homework, I remember as a student, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would do homework and you kind of are doing it on paper. Some problems are super easy. Some problems you think you're right. You kind of wait until office hours. You maybe email the teacher nowadays and wait for them to respond. So much of that could be automated. And I think part of this falls on the educators in the short term. So me as a professor for the class I teach, I take responsibility that, until someone can present me with, systematic AI training for data science students, it's my responsibility to figure out how to provide a good online experience. So that's up to me to, develop my own, testing systems and my own automatic graders and, yada yada. Fortunately, UCLA has good support. So UCLA is like, they have their own team doing research who's coming to me and suggesting tools. Here on this call, you guys have a great guy. I got an email every 15 minutes leading up to this call, like just checking in, sent me the link. I had an issue connecting. He was there. He got me set up. So those are all things that are going to be growing pains in the short term. But I think long term, it's inevitably just the system will catch up and it will be a good experience. With that said, I mean, in my last couple minutes before we switch to QA, I will say that I think there's a tendency for people to be super focused on what's happening in the short term. At the end of the day, like, the world is insane right now, but realistically, like, sooner or later, they're going to develop a vaccine. They're going to develop treatments. You look through the course of history, Spanish flu, all of these.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but please maybe proceed to the question and answer section as we have guests lined up. So
Sure.
I would request the participants, if you have some queries, please put them forward.
Hello, John. John, this is Dr. C.N. Narayan here. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Okay. I'm an educator. I'm the director and the professor. One question to you, I'm a big advocate of technology and the virtual classrooms you're talking about. And recently I conducted a research, during the pandemic period. 16 university colleges students were interviewed on how these virtual classrooms are going. Very interestingly, 72% of the people wanted to come back to classroom. So somewhere, we are not delivering as academicians in terms of content, in terms of making it interesting, experiential learning to students. So one of the factors probably you should look at is the social quotient, because there's a peer learning which happens between students, which may be missing. And then yesterday's session, I talked about what are the things we can do, but is there any specific idea which, we can implement through this webinar?
So I think it's interesting that you mentioned that. The first thing I'll mention is a lot of this is unavoidable. A lot of the education experience is being there. Like, at the end of the day, like, if you think of a marriage, imagine a marriage where you can never see your wife and you can never, or your husband, and you can never sit down and eat dinner together. Like, there is a physical component that no matter what, as human beings, like, everyone wants the college experience. There's a certain human interaction that can't be replicated, and it will take a very long time for AR, VR to catch up. I think that's the first thing to kind of point out. So it's not necessarily that we're failing. Some of this is just inevitable. In terms of that, it kind of is what it is, because unfortunately there's a pandemic. So it's kind of like you have to put safety first. So sometimes, like, you take my son, you have to sacrifice the experience for the sake of safety. Now, with that said, I do think some things are important. I think something that's important is trying to do outside the classroom activities. And what I mean by that is things that are perhaps more social. So I think in engineering classes, there's a tendency for people to be very, very focused, and, like, you go into an engineering class and from the minute everyone shows up, they're like there to learn. Like, they're not there to chat. They're not there to make friends. They're there to learn. Like, they want to get into the meat of it. But I do think that since you don't have the social component of, like, chit-chatting with your friends before class, after class, office hours, I do think, something, I haven't tried it so much in education yet, just because the timing, but like something that's worked well for our employees is having like virtual social events. And for example, like every couple of weeks, we'll do a conference call, and the conference call isn't about work. The conference call is like sort of fun. If you think about a business happy hour where maybe people just go and talk, it's kind of like that. So we'll play games. You know, people will go around the room. There's a game, two truths and a lie. So you have to say two things about yourself that are true and one thing that's a lie. And then people have to guess like what's true and what's not, right? Like different things that kind of, you know, I don't want to say they make it fun because it's kind of cheesy. And at the end of the day, like it's not what we're used to. But I do think that having some stuff outside of education, it makes people feel like they're getting some of the social aspect. You know, I think having like one-on-one calls with students, that's important. You know, like when you're just projecting, like if you have a video, a lecture, you know, it's harder when students, they may feel more disconnect. You know, so I think things like, you know, one-on-one phone calls and, you know, really just trying to take in as many social aspects and things that we take for granted that we normally get from our friends and from like our colleagues. You know, since we're not getting those now, we need to kind of try to embrace those. But, you know, frankly, I would actually be curious, like in your research, to see if there were certain factors that you found to work better. Like was your research amongst a single university, or did you compare different universities and maybe say, okay, one university is more focused on, I don't know, video learning, and another university is more focused on chat learning? And, you know, I think it would be interesting to see studies that are more like, you know, focused on single variables to try to identify those. And, you know, frankly, that's just a matter of time, right? Like this is all pretty new to us. So with time, you're going to see people identify, you know, what are the key things that people care about, right? In-person learning's been going on for hundreds of years. You know, the university I went to is 100 years old, more than 100 years old, you know, like, so it's just going to take time for e-learning to catch up. But it's good. It's a great question. I mean, and I think it's just important to share information amongst your peers and attend conferences like these, just to really like pick people's brains and share knowledge, right?
Thank you, Jordan. Just for your information, 16 universities across the globe it was taken. So the research was there.
Okay.
And the second thing, you know, I like we are not, use any PPT, being a virtual man. And the third thing is, and a robo is developed now to, bring in the ingredients of the traits of human being. So probably we'll see that thing coming very soon in the market. Thank you so much, Jordan. And
thank you, Narayana sir, for your valued inputs to this session as well. Ashi, please start with your thanks note.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, sir, for joining with us and taking up the questions too. It was really interesting to hear you speaking, and it was new for us because you were not using any traditional way of using the PPT, but you were just talking about your own experiences, which made it all the more interesting to hear. Thank you so much, sir, for joining with us.
Okay, thank you guys for having me. And, I look forward to watching.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you so much.
Sir,
thank you, Jordan.
Very nice to have you.
Thank you, guys.
My wishes to Adam as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Next, I would like to hand over the platform to my co-anchor, Mayuri Jadhav, who would introduce our next guest.
Thank you, Ashi. Thank you so much, sir, for joining with us. We would look forward to hear from you again sometime. Happiness, wealth, and a great career is the result of hard work and hustle over time. Good morning, everyone. I am your host, Mayuri Jadhav. I feel delighted to have got this opportunity to introduce you all to our next guest, ADP, Barclays, New York, and Mantle Stevens Institute of Management for Masters in Science, Ms. Shilpi Talukdar. I welcome you, ma'am. Ma'am received her graduation studies from Savitribai Phule Pune University and went ahead to pursue her Masters of Science in Management from Stevens Institute of Technology, New Jersey. Ma'am is skilled in many technologies. Participants, please mute yourself.
Please, speakers, please, participants, please stay silent. Participants request you to not speak.
Mayuri, can you unmute yourself?
Mayuri, unmute yourself.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Ma'am is skilled in many technologies like SQL Server, Release Management, Oracle Crystal Reports, Oracle Database, Agile Methodologies, Finance, CSM, Toad for Oracle, Management of Information Systems, and PHP to say the least. Today, ma'am is here to deliver a session on impact, solutions, and changes foreseen for the new entrants for banking during this pandemic. We are eager to hear from you, ma'am. I request you to take the charge.
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Well, first of all, I would like to thank all of you for having me at this webinar. I'm going to talk a little bit about the pandemic and the banking industry and its impact. Speakers before me have already given so much thought and insight into, how technology has been evolving over the past few months, not to say the least, over the past few years that have propelled us into this situation. So just to touch upon a few of the subjects that will also impact banking, let me just start sharing my screen so that I have a few slides that I was hoping to go through quickly. Give me one moment. All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, ma'am, visible.
Great.
Awesome. Yes, ma'am, it is.
Great. So the first thing I would like to talk about, apart from banking and finance right now, is cybersecurity. This is one industry or one of the facets of technology that has been affected the most during the pandemic and will also affect the outcome of the pandemic. It has basically forced organizations and individuals to embrace new practices, I would say, such as social distancing and remote working. As a bank working in the technology sector, we have observed a spike in phishing attacks, malspams, and ransomware attacks, as attackers are using COVID-19 as bait to impersonate brands and thereby misleading employees and customers. Take, for example, an Outlook email that you get, which basically has an @siom.edu. You wouldn't necessarily look at the person who's sending it. It can, at the end, it can say .edu, .edc, or something like that. It will be very familiar. So how do you distinguish between a phishing attack versus a normal email that your colleague or your peer would send to you, right? So this will likely result in more infected personal computers and phones. So not only businesses are being targeted, not only banks, but end users who download COVID-19 related applications are also being tricked into downloading ransomware disguised as legitimate applications. Secondly, let me actually also share infrastructure, basically how infrastructure has been affected because of the pandemic. Many reasons are there because of which infrastructure project sites have been staring at closure, like labor movement due to the lockdown, supply chain disruptions, These problems are further aggravated by the relief packages that are being rolled out by many states to support the loss of income caused by lockdown. Moving on, perhaps the most important segment that has been affected by the pandemic is healthcare. It has brought unprecedented strain on hospitals and clinics, from a shortage of testing and medical supplies to issues in access amongst rural and underserved populations. Basically, what I would like to say is that COVID has exposed our weak points. It has put a spotlight on some of these inequities, while also revealing holes in the healthcare delivery system. But, while addressing these key challenges, we already knew that there are these challenges in the healthcare system and the public health infrastructure. So we have an opportunity right now to address them. Moving on to the focus of this presentation, which is banking and finance. I would say that the COVID-19 pandemic is probably the most serious challenge to financial institutions in nearly a century. Banks are finding themselves right now juggling some big priorities that require concrete steps to reposition now, while also kind of thinking about what will happen in the future. They're working to keep their distribution channels open, and despite social distancing advice and supervisory and compliance functions that were probably never even designed for remote work, they're trying to manage revenue and customer expectations despite near zero interest rates and growing pressure on consumers. While we are battling these, we also need to keep an eye on strategy and brand issues that will define the bank's future as market forces and customers' behaviors potentially change coming out of this crisis. Moving on to the next slide, I would like to show you what a muted recovery over the next 5 years will look like. Some of the most important factors that we see over here, this is a graphical representation from McKinsey and Company that basically shows how many years it would take for each segment of our society to recover from this pandemic. And especially if we look at the next diagram, it shows which of the sectors in our industry have been most affected. The graph to your right depicts industries that are most affected. Let's take a look at Airbnb, for instance. If you take a look at the biggest circle that's there, it says Airbnb. It says accommodation and food services, the black circle towards your right. And for example, take a look at Airbnb and how it laid off like 25% of its workforce. Looking at the current situation, let's evaluate and observe a few common traits that we have noticed for the banking and finance, as well as the technology sector, to say the least. So the first thing that we observe, that are expected of us as banks and being in finance is that there is an increased expectation for banks to play a societal role just beyond shareholder return. It's not just anymore limited to, I give you money, you give me interest, and that's it. That is our relations. And that is where the relation with the bank is over. Banks right now have responded to citizen needs by implementing mortgage deferral and credit card interest rate relief. Institutions that were already undertaking a shift to stakeholder capitalism, which called attention to the balance required between profits and prosperity amongst large institutions. A good example for this would be the place where I worked at, Barclays. Barclays, in April 2020, it launched a fund which will provide £100 million to charities working to support vulnerable people impacted by COVID-19 and to alleviate the associated social and economic hardship caused by the crisis. I feel proud to be associated with a bank like this, and I hope that other banks as well also follow its cue to help out vulnerable citizens in times of need. The second point that I would like to cover is systemic stability and infrastructure modernization. What I intend to mean by that is, the COVID basically has highlighted the need to upgrade payments infrastructure, especially around identification and authentication. This parallels to the cybersecurity front as well, because government payouts that require proof that certain conditions are met with the advent of enhanced data that could address pandemic use cases. We currently expect an increased focus on solutions such as national digital identity, your Aadhaar ID, that will need to encompass small businesses and corporations rather than principally being focused on citizens. Use cases can be broadened to include emergency communications and tracking as well. The third point that I would like to cover is the crisis giving increased latitude to implement cost reductions at this time. Banks were always looking to cut costs. They were already endeavoring, digital transformation with a goal for reducing cost. Automation, virtualization, all these are keywords that is basically targeted at reducing human effort. And these efforts have now been accelerated due to the crisis. The combination of unexpected cost and impact of the pandemic itself is now forcing the banks to double down on discretionary spend and maintain or reduce the size of their workforce. That is the situation and the observation that has been going on right now. The next point that I would like to bring is remote operating models. As mentioned by Jordan before me, as well as Professor Gandhi before me, remote operating models are evolving at an accelerated pace and will probably drive both benefits and stresses for employers right now and employees too, not just in the education sector, but also in the workforce. Some of the leading observations from here is that, banks have already taken measures to enable most of their workforce to work effectively from home. With the help of VPNs, devices, VDI, consoles, remote consoles, etc. One of the factors that we implemented as a bank was to move 50% of our workforce permanently working from home till September, until this crisis has been averted. So basically, moving on to the new point, new form of financial supervision and conducting expectations. Right now, since there is a pandemic going on, and there are new regulations which are implemented by the government and the regulation agencies in our countries, the priority of regulator and government basically coming out of COVID-19 is foremost going to be on stability, security, and consumer protection. There are initiatives that are aimed at driving efficiency, competition, or utility that will likely be of lower priority for regulatory entities. The last point on my slide will be household and its financial risk. So right now, as we all know, any crisis comes up, we will always aim to move towards a cautious approach. Either to our credit card spend, major asset purchases, for example, homes and automobiles, leading to significant household deleveraging and a reduction in fee-based income for banks or institutions. It will probably have a lasting impact on customer willingness to save. And I, as a customer of a bank, would always put my money not in stocks right now, but in fixed-term deposits, high-interest savings account, etc., and basically to counter the volatility in the capital markets right now. These are just some of the impact and observations that we have seen. Now, moving on to the next slide, this is just an example of how the digital adoption in US and China has moved towards the future after COVID has come up. So if you take a look at this graph, there are online logins, mobile logins, and phone calls. The blue indicates how much more in percentage has this been increasing over the past few months. And towards your left-hand side, you would take a look at the current US remote banking use and percentage of change since December 2019. This kind of gives us a good impression on what the consumer is looking at, what customers who are there for retail banking as well as investment banking are currently using the banking system for. Moving on to some of the scenarios. So let me give you some background about the scenarios. Looking at the trends and how COVID is currently impacting everything, there are 4 distinct scenarios emerging based on current trends and critical uncertainties. First of all, the first scenario will be weathering the storm. This scenario is basically, us imagining that the pandemic is managed due to effective responses from governments to contain the virus, but definitely not without lasting repercussions. Lower and the middle income individuals and communities are affected. Relatively constrained disease dynamic and effective health system and policy response. The second outlook that we are looking at right now is a balanced outlook. A balanced outlook is basically where the governments around the world basically struggle to handle the crisis alone, with large companies stepping up as a key part of the solution and an acceleration of trends towards stakeholder capitalism. We are looking at a more prolonged pandemic, but there is increased collaboration to control the pandemic led by large companies. The third scenario is lessons learned. In this situation, what we are looking at right now is learning more from Chinese or East Asian nations, which are more effective in managing the virus, and taking the reins as primary powers on world stage. The condition of the pandemic is severe, collaborative health response led by East Asian countries and us trying to learn from them and basically collaborating with them to, understand the global economic and recovery from this. And the last but not the least are the underdogs, which are basically small institutions. There we go. So basically small institutions, smaller banks, which did not take the help of any larger bank or institutions, no influx of capital, and therefore are looking at, spurring governments to adopt isolationist policies, shorten supply chains, and increase surveillance. We are also looking at a severe rolling pandemic, insufficient global coordination, and weak policy response. So these are the four scenarios that could happen in the future. I'm not saying that it will, but these are just the four scenarios that we are looking at from where we are right now. And we should be prepared to handle any of these scenarios no matter what, and what happens in the future. So looking at the solution and focus areas, to handle these four scenarios, what should they be? So I have kind of brought it down to 6 steps. Step 1 being business continuity, which is basically focus of the bank and to maintain things like branch distribution, client service operations without interruption. There are some key things that a retail bank such as Barclays or Deutsche or SDFC or SBI Bank have to follow. They have to maintain their branch operations, their ATM operations, their contact operations. The branches need to support social distancing guidelines, switch in branch visits to appointments only, review appointment reasons to see how they might transfer future visits to virtual, call center, or digital channels, giving branch staff, premier bankers, and financial advisors access to data that they'll need to provide tailored guidance. Also considering the current challenges and actionable advice for the long term. There are some internal operations that a bank can also take. Back office operation can take help of third-party support, tighten up controls and policies, and also divvy up on employee compensation and benefits. So basically what I'm trying to say is if banks rebalance workloads across operational sites, given that some areas will be affected more than the others, we may be able to shift some employees from non-critical work to essential operations and basically come up with developing, documenting, and communicating a plan to process any kind of incoming deals or mergers, given that facility footprints may change. The second point is, as a bank, will be to show empathy to your customers while making sound business decisions. Like how we respond to our customers could be pivotal to how our brand is seen for years to come. Many banks already have mountains of customer segmentation data that can play a critical role in determining and meeting customer needs. For instance, you can use this data to identify which customers are better positioned to ride out the crisis and those who will need more active management and outreach. From here, you may need to develop specific defined customer service suggestions, such as converting credit card balances to home equity lines with fee deferrals or waivers for homeowners who need liquidity. So some of the relationship strategies over here that can help in the near term future would be to manage customer perception, the brand image, and commitment to the local community, perhaps even proactive outreach and growing share of wallet. And also, I would like to mention customer relief and remediation. The third point would be the step 3 of this solution package would be to rethink our balance sheet challenges while maintaining loan stress and customer sensitivity. I would say that in the coming weeks or months, most banks will likely see their liquidity buffers come under pressure. It could prompt some difficult balance sheet decisions about how we'll use the liquidity. Each bank will need to determine its own appetite for risk, but most will likely be very hesitant to go below a minimum unless there's a coordinated bank response to a severe need. As a bank, we'll have to monitor deposit fluctuations, particularly as our clients try to remove risk from the portfolios and draw on credit lines to increase our cash positions. Evaluate client refinancing deals against our balance sheet strategy. We'll want to consider how government stimulus may create lending opportunities and change profitability measures. We will also look for opportunities to refinance existing debt or raise new funding at attractive rates. Coming up to step 4, we can also look at trimming our costs quickly. Spending on activity that doesn't build on our core capabilities is a strict no-no for banks right now. The current situation makes this triage even more important. In many industries, companies are already freezing hiring for non-essential employees, amongst other quick hits. Various segments we can take a look at about this, the corporate area, the procurement area, we can take a look at back office functions, we can look at IT, we can look at marketing, we can look at customer service. So all these will, cutting costs in all these segments would basically help us focus our capabilities in areas which will need our help the most. The 5th point will be to reset our revenue outlook. Our risk management processes may be exposed to many standard models that haven't been designed to accurately capture the risk dynamics of a negative rate. We may need to stratify our deposit portfolio to accept attrition if we can't find a way to enhance customer profitability. We can, in this situation, we'll need to define trade-offs between deposit margin contributions, growth, and cost of managing deposit products. Particularly if loan growth slows, the new deposit funding could feed growth of low duration, low return cash. And the last but not the least, replot the post-COVID-19 strategy. It might be too early to imagine a post-COVID-19 world, but it's important to take the long view. We believe that a few factors like adapting to a new customer norm with new business models, rethinking what will drive a brand loyalty, restructuring the addressable market to grow beyond the core, and also reconstruct the resiliency plan will help us with retail banking success after the emergency passes. Perhaps even reprioritize capital allocation plans and M&A, and continue to build upon our strong societal relevance. And with this, I'm kind of referencing to something I showed you on slide number 2 before. Moving on from the topic of impact and solutions of the pandemic for the banking sector, which is quite lengthy, let's take a look at what the industry is saying right now. Building a resilient distributed enterprise architecture in post-COVID era. We are looking at BFSI hiring points towards an imminent slowdown. Is this news bad? Yes, of course it is. But we can also take a look at what the future will look like. Just because the pandemic is, slowing things down doesn't mean it's not giving us opportunities to build ourselves, to rethink, relearn, upskill ourselves into this new era. So I have kind of collected some of the few sectors which I thought would be useful to the upcoming students that are there currently in college, and perhaps even others if they take a look at it. Some of the key areas that I thought that this would be important would be e-commerce. Why I say that is that, technology jobs, it basically COVID-19, it highlighted a predictable shift to online and mobile shopping channels following the virus. There are technology jobs relating to e-commerce that basically look protected. Similarly, remote service desks and virtual contact centers, which are staffed by people sitting at home and working from home, that are expected to become a thing. The second point I would like to mention is automation. Right now, automation jobs should prove resilient in the near future term. So basically, if we spend on machine learning and artificial intelligence, that is currently the strongest in the banking sector right now, there are other sectors that are likely to increase their adoption. So if you're working in a machine learning in a bank setup, this might give you an option to switch to a whole new industry vertical. The next point would be regulatory focused projects. So for that, I would like to say that basically, because of the pandemic, many people are reinventing regulations. After years of technology spending growth in the banking and finance industry, we can basically look at the pandemic that will finally reverse the trend. There are many projects supporting new growth initiatives that are off the table, and it's all about essential and regulatory projects only. As bank shifts to a cost-cutting agenda, spending on technology will increasingly need to be funded by cuts elsewhere. Next on the slide is cybersecurity. I think I mentioned this before. Cybersecurity jobs will be big. It's going to be one of the hot areas post-COVID. Remote working has created like a bunch of attack vectors that people will try to exploit. So I would expect jobs to be increasing in that sector. Next would be software as a service. Let me give you an example of Goldman Sachs, which was already building a new Sky team to help manage the transition from their legacy systems to cloud. Software as a service, platform as a service, and even infrastructure as a service jobs are likely to become more popular in all industries, even if there are some short-term hiccups. Public cloud it's being driven by its cost advantages, by its agility and resilience, and most importantly, under COVID, by its superiority in enabling work from home. Banks especially have a lot of heavy lifting to do in order to move into the public cloud. Because banks like JP Morgan, Barclays, even Morgan Stanley, they heavily rely on legacy systems that have been there for years and have not been remodeled. As an example, right now, we are moving on to a cloud, into a Salesforce customer relationship management platform, CRM for short, right now. And we are heavily investing a lot of money and effort into making sure that our systems are supported by cloud. The next point would be understanding client analytics. I would say that analytics is big. You would want to work in analytics. The COVID situation has made it important to understand client behavior and to determine remote worker productivity. And obviously, because of that, analytics systems are all the rage, and you will be looking at a good job prospect over here. And lastly, but not the least, change management. This is kind of a bit dicey. You probably don't want to work on a change team because right now, from what I see, finance companies are reconsidering their commitment to ambitious change projects, with, of course, exception to the cloud migration project that I was talking about. And I think that's about it, like some of the key areas that I gathered that are looking good in the post-COVID world, and also within the next few months that we're looking at. And finally, I would move on to my last slide, which is towards the end of our presentation. The key motto for banking right now is to respond, recover, and thrive. And to address that, the priority of government and regulators who are coming out of COVID-19, it will be foremost on stability, security, and consumer protections. And most of the initiatives that are aimed are at driving efficiency, competition, and utility. So, although the level of uncertainty and volatility is really, really hard to miss in the current environment, we are hopeful that banks and other financial service institutions are well positioned to protect consumers, small businesses, customers while preparing for the road ahead. The volatility of the weeks ahead will continue to shape the recovery. And hopefully, like all major events, there will be a learning curve, shift in strategies, and there will be leaders who emerge. And with that, I will now open the session to Q&A, if any.
Shilpi, very good evening to you. Wonderful presentation, in fact. It slightly is different in India when it comes to banking sector. My name is Dr. C.N. Narayan. Okay, the director of Pune Business School. What we have actually operated throughout the pandemic. The banks were open throughout till recently. The short-term disruptions is likely to lead to accessibility concerns, but not definitely in India. The research which you have shown in China and US, but if you have shown India, probably things will be entirely different. And the more prolonged crisis is likely to increase the customer preference towards digital. So that channel is going to definitely grow. And the full-blown pandemic, which is likely to lead to a significant reductions. If you look at RBI, they have swung into action, looking at a prolonged disruption happening. Now, how would you rate India versus the advanced countries like US and China have taken a lot of steps in banking industry, including the Singapore I'm talking about? But in India, it has still not come to that level because we have a lot of core, banking in the sense to address the poor people. We have a PM Yojana or something where 500 rupees is credited. People queue up for miles together to collect that. So how do you address these issues because they're not even connected to the online banking? Barclays is doing a great job because it's in a creamy layer. So for a normal person, how do you look at this?
So from a personal perspective, first of all, thank you for asking this question. It's very important. And you're right. In my research, I should have included India as well. If from a personal perspective, I believe that the Prime Minister is doing his best to provide relief packages to people who do not have access to digital means, like net banking, for example, to access their funds or even to, day-to-day activities. I think it leads to the question about how equipped our country is to handle the infrastructure that comes along with digital adoption. I believe there are talks about 5G being implemented in India. I don't know how much that is true. I'm afraid I'm not an expert in the area, but I would say that, yes, there's a hard path ahead for us, but with regular adoption. For example, let's take a look at, the elderly people who were there 20 years ago. They did not know how to operate, not 20 years ago. Let's take an example of 5 years ago. They did not know how to open an account. They would go to the banks. They would, print their passbook and feel the safety and security of seeing that amount on their passbook and come back. But right now, there is a younger generation which is teaching them to how to open their account online and look at all their details online. So I would say that, yes, there's something that the older generation also needs to learn from the younger generation and vice versa. I know this doesn't answer your question directly, but from what I think is, with small steps, but yes, we can definitely look towards a brighter future in terms of adapting digital technologies. And yes, it's heavily reliant on the infrastructure of the country adapting to the speed with which other countries are as well.
Thank you, Shilpi.
Oh, yeah. Narayan, just once second. I need thank you, Narayan. I think so. Shilpi, having a few number of years of experience, has done justice to the question, because what I feel is having to know it from the experienced people who have been working working in this industry or in our academia segment for say 20 to 30 years, and to know from people who have just set in, have a 6 to 7 to 10 years of experience, it is imperative to know the views and ideas and the problems and the solutions from all the groups or all the segments. So Shilpi's answer, I think so, was is well taken for. Yes, the overall view or the overall status of how India should comply with it, or how you in comparison to US and China, I think so. Those who are in the, more experience would be able to cite, but then nothing can be taken for granted, because these are all trial and experimental procedures which we set up. We set up strategies, some get implemented, some do not get implemented. Thank you, Shilpi, for that wonderful answer. And Narayana sir, you are two very experienced, I know. Participants, please note that Dr. CNN Narayana is actually the director of Pune Business School. He has been very kind to help us collaborate for this international event, and he's a very learned man. 108, I think so, awards is in possession of him, and hence his support to this international webinar has been phenomenal. Now let me take 1 minute more in introducing our esteemed Dr. Shankar Navle, who is the principal, or who has been hearing to us. He just messaged me that I am there and you are doing a wonderful job. So Dr. Shankar Navle is the principal at NB Navle Singhgar College of Engineering, Sholapur. He has done his PhD research from University of Rome, Italy, and the postdoctoral research from Grenoble University, France, and is also the recipient of European Commission Fellowship for PhD as well as postdoctoral. Thank you, Navle sir. And if you are there, then please do respond. And if you have questions, or if you want to put in some 2 or 3 points for this webinar, or for some insightful statements, so we are here to hear you. And please stay on because we're having a few more questions as well. Yeah. Over to Navle sir.
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Chandrani. I'm very happy that SIOM has organized this international webinar. From yesterday morning, I'm attending this webinar. I'm saying that you have called very reputed speakers. All the speakers are very informative. I have enjoyed all the sessions basically.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Yeah. It is very wonderfully coordinated, very wonderfully organized program. Though it's online, but I'm thinking that I am in the I'm sitting in the auditorium. I'm listening to each and everyone. All the speakers are very capable speakers. Their information, whatever they are sharing, even they are trying their level best to answer everybody's question. I must congratulate the entire team and all the organizers. I'm saying that there are so many collaborations, even from collaborations from Kolkata, and then Pune University is also there. Of course, Singhgar has taken the lead. Yeah. I'm saying each one of you. Thank you, Dr. Chandrani, and I will not take much of your time because there are so many audience who are listening to you. I'm not considered to be a speaker, but thank you for introducing me. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Reciprocated your feelings.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other question for Shilpi?
No, right now I don't have any question. I'm just listening to her. As you mentioned that she is also trying her level best to answer the questions of other audience.
Team, please ask any other participant who wishes to question Shilpi.
Participants, if you have any queries, please unmute yourself. Okay, I request participants, if anyone have queries, please drop in WhatsApp group. Thank you so much, ma'am. It will help us to focus and will be a great asset to all of us. We hope to hear from you soon again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. It is said that the secret of getting started. Well said. Next up in the series of such amazing guest speakers, I am honored to have advisor, ex-MD of Sandvik Asia, ex-VP of SAPL, and ex-professor IIT Kharagpur, Dr. Sanjay Basu. I welcome you, sir. Sir was a professor at Department of Metallurgy and Material Science, IIT Kharagpur for 13 years and visiting faculty to Europe for 2.5 years. Sir has been serving Sandvik Asia Private Limited SAPL, a subsidiary of Sandvik AB Sweden for 34 years since 1980. Organized the R&D Center for Coromat and Hard Materials at Pune. Built Sandvik's Global Recycling Center for Cemented Carbide and received the first national award from Government of India for the Best in-House R&D Center in Metallurgy in India. Post-retirement, Sir functioned as corporate advisor to the MD of Sandvik Asia for 13 years till 2014 in the areas of diversification, project management, and business analysis. Sir is helping SAPL in strategic formulation and management. Due to this, Sandvik Asia's business grew rapidly in 10 years. Today, Sir is with us to deliver a session on the topic Role of Skill Management in Modern Technological Culture, Some Experiences. We are keen to hear from you, sir. I request you to please take the charge.
Good morning to you.
Good morning, sir. Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay. So, thank you for inviting me for this beautiful program, webinar. I am little of older generation, so this is one of my first experience, but it's quite an experience. Just one word about Sandvik. This is a Swedish transnational company with 3 business areas in tools, mining, and special metals. And it is one of the first Fortune 100 companies in the world with a $13 billion turnover. It has been present in India for many, many years, in fact, after early years of independence. So there is a big root here. So if we go to the next slide, can I have the next slide, please? Yes, thank you. My presentation is somewhat different from the rest because I'll be concentrating on skills and mostly on nut and bolt technology with which I'm familiar. But of course, in the background, there is a digital technology always present. And I'll leave out the big areas of management, soft skills, etc., and concentrate on technology, where, as I said, digital is always present. And I'll try to review the current skill development status in India and also open up the post-COVID possibilities. I'm more concerned with that because COVID will go and we have to return to a different normality perhaps, but we need to take on our tasks with a new vigor. I'll also cover the baseline industries like agriculture, tiny, small, medium industry, a few words over large manufacturing units. Then most interesting, which are promised in this one, some case studies on skill management, which is mine own and some others. A little bit on education training and last words on culture. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide, please? Yes, thank you. Coming to the rural agriculture sector, I start with a flag and a salute to our farmers who, with minimal education and facilities, developed skills of modern agriculture and brought in the green revolution and a record food production. And then they further went ahead and brought in what is called white revolution in milk and brown revolution in poultry. One particular case has always fascinated me is Punjab, which didn't have much industrial activity to begin with. But by mechanization and entrepreneurship and capitalization of agriculture, they became one of the richest states in the country. And unfortunately, as I said, the rest of the country is yet to learn. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes. There are some review shows as we scan through the whole horizon, good improvement in horticulture and fisheries. But what is important that any skill training of technical nature needs a basic educational skill. And if I can go back to the previous slide, and there it is important that basic primary and secondary education is acted upon and they are provided. Today it is minimal or non-existent in particularly deep rural area. Then of course it is necessary to have vocational courses. I have given some references, post-harvest technology, etc. And things like housing, food management, everything is required. But one thing is important to realize that for development to take place, a kind of mini urbanization is required, habitat development, rural roads, and with focused vocational skill. Now we can see some list. We do not go through that. Next one, please. Next one, please. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, let's take on that. So one of the good things that is happening in this country is some focused attention on skill development. And you saw the list in the before the slides go on. Previous slide. A list of focused organization has been brought in. And they have gone into some 20 odd skill areas to have a focused development on skill, which is a good one. I had contacted an NGO in Ranchi called Society of Rural Industrialization, who has been working in the agricultural area for a long time. And from their director, I sought some advice on this subject. He came up with 3 sectors of work: land and water-based, engineering-based, and non-engineering service-based. Much smaller profile than the other one, but perhaps more practical and implementable. Next one, please. Next slide, please. Yes, this is one of my favorite slides because I worked with McKinsey years ago to develop this one. This is currently showing a technology and demographic link in this country before we talk of skill. On the left side, we are showing the different classes of households, and they mention them as consumers, climbers, aspirants, like that. Basically, middle class and similar situation. And what is interesting that over the years, hello.
Yes, sir.
No. Please note that over the years, the bulging middle class is an exceedingly important aspect of our the middle class is a bulging thing in India, and they are the biggest consumers. And technologically, we have tried to reflect it in 3 consumer products: car, motorbike, and bicycle. In fact, we have started to see the statistics, how the cycle production is going down and car and motorbike one is going on. So the nature of skill in the technological sector is itself shifting. And that is also further strengthened with a huge number of young people around. Next slide, please. So if we look at micro, small, and medium enterprises, you can see a list of those items on the right. Some statistics here, but mainly indicative because there is a lot of confusion in statistics in India, and this is one area. But million to say that there's a very large number. Some people say there's 63 million units with a sales of some rupees 30 trillion, of which 62% is manufacturing, etc., etc. But please note that their statistic shows that there could be only 2% per unit because it covers small rural units like smithies and all that to fairly large auto component manufacturers like that. And interesting is that export is 22%. As you all know that Indian engineering export is largely from small, medium sector. Another interesting information I received is that of this, 72% is non-powered. That means they're purely hand-skilled. Perhaps this covers village industry, looms, etc. And also the number of these units is highest in UP with 90 lakhs, and the next one comes West Bengal and Tamil Nadu in that order. Next slide, please. So what is the skill requirement from this? And that is provided by ITIs and industrial training centers. And here again, you can see the different statistics and situations. Very large number of ITIs and number of 32 in some engineering and 22 non-engineering, etc. The capacities are all there and details are there, but unfortunately, there are problems with quality. And the duration is 1.1 to 2 years like that. Next slide, please. But more interesting thing is the polytechnic side. Now, I got these statements from a government paper, is to create a pool of skill-based manpower to support shop floor and field operations in middle-level link between technicians and engineers. So they part a very important role in supervisors in this. And small and medium-scale industry prefer the diploma holders because of the special skills in interpreting drawings, estimating, costing, etc. And besides, in fact, accepting design and part, they more or less learn a lot of practical aspect of engineering and rather useful because of hands-on, supposed to be hands-on training they receive. Next slide. The problem with this group of industries is that, hello, can I have the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Yeah. Now, I think we have missed out one important slide before that. Can you go back to that one, please? Yeah. Okay. I think we have missed you, but it doesn't matter. This is one area where I had a large personal experience in developing. Let's go back to the previous one, please. Can you please go back to the previous one? Okay, here is a list of problems in the polytechnic education. And I need not to go through the list because most of it is well known to all of you. But what I stress is the last part, the lack of overall social recognition. You know, they're neither engineers nor technicians. Socially, they're some kind of outcast in that sense. And this is a major problem where our skill development suffers. Now we'll go to some actual case studies, please. Next one. Few years ago, I was asked to set up a training academy for our, yes, just hold on, please. This is an important slide which I will share my own experience with the audience. Sandvik was selling a very modern mining and excavation equipment into Indian market, mainly to mechanize the mines and tunneling and other operations. And the picture on the right side shows the change of technology which is expected to be brought about with this introduction. Now, these are very sophisticated machinery, and it has all aspects of modern technology. And we had problems in finding people or training people to handle that at the customer's end and later on. So we set up a training academy at Pune, and we picked up diploma holders, as we saw last time, as a basic students for these courses. These are 2 years courses. But what I want you to see, after a discussion of the nature of skill that is required, we had specific timing given, and one of them is on safety technology, which is never taught in any schools, college, and institutes. And then there are technical courses, semi-technical courses, and also soft skills and English language. Because we get students from all over India. We try to take students from the area where they'll get jobs in mining areas like in Bihar or Andhra Pradesh or Rajasthan, so that they can also mingle with the local people and get their assistance like that. So this is required, but you can see the amount of effort that was required to me as if we are starting from scratch. But it was all worth it. And you can see the laboratories and the processes that they are learning. Now they are able to manage this highly sophisticated machinery at all parts of the country, whether it's tunnel making in the Himalayas or a big open ground mining in the Chennai. They're working all over and working very successfully. And I think this was a learning for all of us also. And behind all this training, there's a huge amount of digital technology. So digital learning is an integral process, including simulator. I think my previous speakers talk about simulators in aircraft. In all our sophisticated machines, we have simulators for training for the operator as well as for those who are working on maintaining and running this, and also manufacturing those. So digital technology is an integral part of this, and this has to be brought in a big way. Coming to the virtual learning, it's an integral process in company culture because the technology is advancing rapidly and we need to update our technicians constantly. So we aim at, we may not succeed all the time, about 15 to 20% of his working time goes in training and retraining, and mostly it is in digital form. This is just to share an actual experience. The next one is another kind of experience in skilling. Next one, please. This is on the manufacturing side, because when he started, yes, please hold on here. In 1980, see, company came in at the LCR in 16, 20 years. You remember the country's economic condition didn't allow it to grow much, so they had to use a very base technology. And it was only 20 crores in 1980 with over 2,000 personnel, mainly manual machinery and all. So we decided that this cannot go on. We have to become global. So we started investing and retraining. And one major thing we did is, again, replacing the manual workers and blue-collar operators with the diploma holders engineers. We used to call them technologists, and we had remarkable result with that. And this is, I'm presenting the role of reskilling is so important in our industry. And as a result, the business grew and we reached about 200 crores by the end of the century. That is not much, but really made a baseline which let us grow 10 times in next 10 years up to 2,000 crores. Now today, which we are not doing much export earlier, we are exporting 100% of the products abroad, and if necessary for Indian market, we are re-importing that. So this is somewhere we experience ourselves the role of reskilling and skilling up through education and practical training, the results that are required. Next slide, please. This is from our colleague industry, Bharat Forge. They are also Pune based. I do not know whether you know, this is, if not one of the, or if not the only Indian industry, you can say, largest in the world. Headquartered in Pune, they have also added some 8 manufacturing bases all over the world. And the turnover has grown enormously. So one of the things they did that when they started rebuilding, reskilling, they replaced again 1,800 blue-collar workers with technologists and largely white collar. So as soon as the skill is moving into more on brain-oriented, all companies started getting benefit of it. And that is what we are falling behind in the rest of the world, and we are trying to catch up. The next one, please. Now, on the automotive sector, as you know, the small and medium scale sectors are very active. And as you can see, all over India, particularly wherever there are auto manufacturing zone, very large number of medium scale industries exist. And it was growing very rapidly. Some of the things like India is world's, I think, second largest manufacturer of tractors and one of the largest manufacturers for heavy vehicles, even if we are not largest in cars. We had become largest some years ago in motorbike, beating China as well. So these are the developments in auto sector, and this is an early stage. The future is wide open. And all this has been made possible by skilling and upskilling, as well as introducing large amount of digital skill in this process. Next slide. Next slide, please. This is something I wanted to share because this came as a surprise to us in early years. This is a study by Merrill Lynch requested by American automotive industry when they are planning to come in big way into India. At that stage in 2005, 2006, at that time, they wanted to see the in design machining ability in India, whether India is in a position to absorb the technology that they want to import. Of course, the Koreans were there, the Japanese were there, and Merrill Lynch carried out this study, and based with the quality certification and on, we had a very surprising result. They placed India at the same level as Germany. So there are pockets and capabilities in India which are absolutely world standard even at that stage, which made us very excited. And we really proceeded in our company as well as in many companies under CII, and advised to proceed further. Next one, please. This is something which gives us so much strength to think that if we can provide the real skill. Now we come to the graduate engineering skill. And here I do not want to speak much because I come from IIT, I come from the same background. There are volumes written and even more volumes spoken about the quality of Indian graduates. And there are 2 quotations I've used here which are my own experience. When in the Silver Jubilee convocation address, the Prime Minister said that understand IIT produces elite engineers, hope they can repair leaking taps in their own homes. That is one comment. And there was a feedback from an American professor from Colorado School of Mines, a friend of mine. Your engineers are strong in theory, but need to be taught how to hold a screwdriver. You see, some of this, why I'm stressing this practicality all the time, that we tend to move away from the skill of fingers, and these unemployability issues also come up in a big way. I feel one of the necessity thing in this country is to standardize and ranking technical institutes in undergraduate program. There is a lot of details about papers, publication, global these things and all. But undergraduate education, which is a main task of engineering college, the institute should be ranked because it would help both the employers and the student to choose the right places. And countries, I would like to conclude my presentation by another suggestion that the countries that I have experienced with, like Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and partly Sweden, is the tremendous stress on sandwich program on apprenticeship to develop as a process of skill development. And in these countries, and even my colleagues in those countries, 70% come from apprenticeship. So I'll just spend a few slides in the middle and the German apprenticeship program or sandwich program which they follow, which I think is something which you should consider very seriously. Next slide, please. As you can see, some of these are from literature, and they are doing a kind of dual program connected with a vocational training with an in practice. As a result, they take a little longer time perhaps, and they finally, when they come to the factory, they already have a job. The factories also take a stand in preparing their manpower today's and tomorrow's. I think I have seen a comment in this webinar where a question is asked what kind of interaction is required between industry and academics to prepare the field. And this is one great example that the technologically advanced countries are very much taken into this. Secondly, Germany has what some of the highest small medium. Next slide, please. You can see on the right side, 80% comes from the small businesses, and mostly they are Mittelstand or family-held business dual standard. So there are some similarities between Indian situation because a large part is manufactured market, but where it is different is the skill level, quality, output, and business level, and that is basically required. But the industries need to integrate very closely the academics, and I personally feel sad that compared to medical education, legal education, why in India it is necessary to prepare engineers in front of blackboards only. We leave this part and move on. Next slide, please. A little bit about post-COVID and future, what our technologies need to face. Some ideas, because Western manufacturing is now moving with the integration of the digital technology and all that has been discussed, all the academics of all that, with this industry 4.0, with automated production, 3D printing, big data. These are all coming, and particularly Germany is again taking a lead. Autonomous vehicles, automatic cars is already a practicality. On this side is 5G technology, smart city. The list is a lot. They are coming rapidly, and I don't think we'll have much resting time post-COVID. So we might as well prepare ourselves for this. The next slide will show two examples of this from Sandvik itself, please. Next slide, please. See, here we took in a group on the environment and sustainability side is to reduce the carbon footprint in steel making. You know, millions of tons of coal is used to make steel and in the furnaces. So Sandvik and some European companies are moving to hydrogen to manufacture steel. And the aim is to really have very low carbon footprint. And also to use, this company uses 82% of recycled steel. So these are some of the approaches. We'll need new technological understanding, new skills to take up the equipment and production of tomorrow. We have one interesting recent introduction is normal tubes, stainless tubes used in high technology area like say nuclear reactors or aircraft components and all that. So Sandvik supplies these with embedded sensors. Now, intelligent tubes. Please, plain tube, can you think of that? It can measure temperature, strain, vibration, all embedded into this. A chip inside each piece of tube. So this is coming, and we are seeing and experiencing it ourselves. And we have to prepare ourselves through skill, through understanding, both through virtual and reality, ready to be handled. Next one, please. Maybe that is. Can we go to the next slide? A little bit of talk about culture. Next one, please.
Sir, this is the last slide.
Actually, you don't have any more, are you sure?
26 is the last slide.
Oh, there you are. The culture. Yes, this is the last one, please. This is the skill and culture. This is the last one. This is, the trend in skill development has moved from manual to mechanization to electrical inputs, automation to remote control, etc. So skill of finger is moving to the skill of brain. But what we must remember that both are required. You cannot live on skill of brain alone. And India, unfortunately, accepting artists and artisan manual skill is not respected. Maybe it's a very old habit. One thing, at least I personally feel, that our school are not giving this input, the importance of manual skill, and giving some examples, including class orchestra, or every house having a workshop, and hobby centers and hobby shops, enormous and large. And I had an opportunity to listen to one Rockefeller who casually said that his pastime is mowing lawns. The respect and the train to learn finger skill is so big in USA. I'm so happy that one of my previous speakers from USA mentioned that though he is an IT specialist, he loves to do metal work and welding. And this is the typical structure that is required for modern technology absorption and skill development. So I think we have to learn a little more and more. But as I said, I'm very hopeful. And with the advent of digital technology, I am now very firmly looking at the post-COVID situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for such an informative session. Some of our fellow participants have put forward some questions which I would request you to acknowledge, please. Participants, if anyone have any queries, please unmute yourself and put your queries forward.
Hello.
Hello, yes.
Hello. Yeah. Good afternoon. So this is Ashish.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah.
I'm listening.
My question is that in continuation to the previous two sessions, one from Jordan and one from Mr. Gandhi, again, it's a very good connected and think that the way that all are arranged. Now it's my pleasure to ask you one question, that the question which I asked to Mr. Gandhi also about the virtual internship. And your presentation also, I have seen some kind of simulations and all. But my question is again like that: does the industry will accept the person with a skill set through the e-learning or a virtual internship for a job placement?
We have, of course, a kind of loose internship programs in Indian industry, where we pick up students from diploma schools or graduate school for 6 months to 1 year. And a part of that internship is, of course, as I said, all industries, all model, they need to do virtual learning. For instance, many of our training material comes from Sweden, and they are constantly upgraded, and some of the teachers are there. In mining academy, we used to have teachers from Africa, Canada, the mining countries, Australia, who used to see distance learning coach and all that. So internship theoretically exists, and the virtual learning is practiced. But as I mentioned in presentation, it is pitifully low. And that's why I talked about Mittelson effect, where it is sandwiched every 1 year. The apprentices, they work in the factory for 1 year, and they go back to the classes in the next year like that. So I hope with concentration or improvement of internship plans, we of course improve the program, and virtual learning is an important part of it. Now it is going to be part of our culture and life in every walk.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, please.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I'm Pooja, a MCA student from SIOM.
Yes, please.
So my question is, as we know, government in May announced a stimulus package of 20 lakh crore for the micro, small and medium enterprises, focusing as a part of it, how it will help in skill development to tackle the post-COVID situations, which will be coming in next years?
I think this is a very good question, because as I have shown you in my presentation, there are a lot of government and government plus industry efforts going up in the skilling in the different sectors. So all I hope that this money is put in a very concentrated manner And one good advantage is the development of industrial clusters. For instance, if you have a cluster for foundries or say textiles in Tirupur, if they put a few hundred lakhs there developing testing laboratory, e-learning processes and all that, I'm sure it will be of great help. And because of small personnel level in often smaller industries, they lack facilities like marketing skill, standardization skill, testing skills. Those will be available perhaps in it. So I'm very hopeful that if properly used, I use the word that properly used, this fund will definitely help. I have a trust in the entrepreneurship of our small industries and also an agriculturalist. All we have to do from the countryside is to facilitate without too much interference. I'm sure they'll pick up the necessary skills if the doors are open.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, as a student, I also want to ask a question that will there any change in the skills requirement? Means
change in the skill requirement?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir, in future.
There's an enormous and continuous change. That's what I intend to say. I had another slide shows that this management by learning. Today it is not by management by objective, management by control. But today is a process of management learning. Even top management people have to continuously learn. So people down under who are on the shop floor or in the market or on the field, they have to continuously update it. Just to give you an idea how skill development is necessary. It's cordon cutting tools that we manufacture. There are 40,000 items. Okay? 40,000 items in one product line. And 50% of them are less than 5 years old. So 20,000 items have been introduced in 5 years. So 4,000 average per year. Actually, every day, every hour, some item is getting introduced into the whole issue. Can you imagine the amount of technology is generated, imparted, and then to be absorbed down the line by the production and market? So what government does, they send government packages. Now it is all digital to the engineers as well as to customers with all the information and training material required to absorb these new technologies. So this is a continuous upscaling required even in one particular area. And then one has to add sometimes some management skills that your institutes provide or some IT skills which are required to be added in that process goes on. But you see, I personally believe all skills need not be concentrated. One has to choose and pick some aspect of it to make the process work. Today, handheld instruments are very common everywhere, whether it's in the factory or in the field, and they are all digitally processed and digitally, but they also have problems. They have to be repaired, they have to be properly used, and those skills have to be retained. Yes, skilling is a continuous process, and as I said, we aim to see that our employees spend some 15% of their time on education and reskilling.
Professor Basu, this is Dr. Chandrani Singh. Actually, during Professor Gandhi's, presentation, we were contemplating that how we can facilitate experiential learning for the mechanical, civil, and this core engineering discipline students. Okay, because see, if it is computer science and IT, a lot depends on the application side. So programming, coding, building tools, everything can be had through in an online mode as well as through the various software tools and utilities which are there. But for the core disciplines like your mechanical, civil, construction, civil and construction, then your electrical. So what will be your suggestion with regard to the experiential learning so that actual skill development happens for these students in this scenario where we are talking about a blended approach or a 30% online approach? So what, as per, because you have been in the industry for so long with Sandvik Asia and so on. So I just wanted to know your thoughts and perspectives on that.
Dr. Singh, I am very grateful that you raised this point. I think today morning we are discussing this issue oftentimes, and I agree with you, it's a vital issue. Some of them can be virtual, but many knowledge and many skills are real,
Yeah.
And how do we impart in this situation? There are two parts. First, supposing there's non-COVID, and there I have very strongly recommended the German system of Mittelstand, that every year followed by 1 year of hands-on experience with the industry. And industries pick up these people and train them in gradually in that direction. So they don't lose much time once they join actually to retrain them again. So that is one model which I very strongly advocate, because as I said, we should not prepare engineers in front of blackboards, though there are some laboratories and all that. But besides that, in a situation like this, when things are locked down, simulators are a very huge help. We use it very often in the sophisticated machinery, which the students or our employees, they, whenever free time or actually allotted time, even when they're working, they have to go and work on the simulators, try to see the problem. That is one thing, is one definitely possible. And there are some courses where, for instance, in hydraulics, I have seen that through computer, you can actually learn the hydraulic process, and then the teacher sets a fault, and the student has to find out, all in computer. This is a kind of, but the real process of holding the instrument in your hand cannot be replaced.
That cannot. So like if we have skilled them through such online modes, such virtual modes, as we were talking in Professor Gandhi's session. So, so what is the success rate, Professor? Because you were a professor also with IIT Kharagpur. I know that. So what is the success rate? And after that skilling, that hands-on skill means how much is the knowledge gained at that point of time? Is it 20%? Is it 30%? The rest 70% has to be on the shop floor or has to be a physical hands-on. So I would like to know on that.
Yes, here I have to share one of the experiences from IIT and later on. That average engineer would like to move to management jobs, So from IIT BTech, they will join one of your institute because they think because of the payment and all that, it's a large don. And then the next group will join the IT because it's a job situation. Having said that, you have seen the skill level developed in India in design and manufacturing. There are students who are very interested to move into manufacturing or practical technology.
Correct.
So I would say that what they pick up from the institutes, we had a problem. I'll share with you, Dr. Singh, that as a metallurgist, we had a problem that in 4 or 5 years, what do we teach our students? Do we teach them steel? Do we teach them non-ferrous metals? Do we teach them foundry? And to give them working knowledge, because the knowledge itself is expanded and exploded,
Correct.
So we touch the baseline on these basic metallurgical subjects, so that we hope in one of those areas our students will get a job and they build on their own and the help of the industry. So finally, to answer your question, we give some basic gut feeling of technology in the institutes. I hope I'm not undermining the situation, because today's in technological knowledge, that gut feeling takes a lot, including an enormous amount of digital knowledge, mathematics, physics, and a lot. But we do that so that he doesn't feel lost and he's ready to pick up any other area that is his strength. That's what they do in USA. When our students go to USA or to Germany, they so quickly build up. So to answer your question, we prepare the baseline, ma'am, nothing beyond. And then master's course and all that gives them a little more.
Okay. Correctly answered, very aptly answered, Dr. Boshu. I wanted to, in fact, we can carry on this discussion, but then.
I'd love to.
But then, we are bound by certain time constraints. Otherwise, thank you so much, Dr. Boshu.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for such an informative session. We look forward to put some of techniques we have learned today into practice. We hereby come to the end of first half of our day 2. We would take a break and intend to begin the session at 2 p.m. So I request you all to join in by 1:45 p.m. so that you don't miss anything. Thank you all.